Historic Landmarks Commission. Is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on an item not on the agenda? Seeing no one stepping forward, we'll move on to the approval of the minutes of the meeting of February 22nd.
So moved.
I heard Mahan first. I'll take Suding as a second. Are there any comments or corrections requested?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Mahan.
I have a question on page 12. Item 4 of the commission's comments. The human scale of the building is not appropriate or compatible with our public guidelines. I think it should say the lack of human scale is what is not compatible.
That would be more correct.
Oh, excuse me. I have to repeat that.
That was,
The lack of human scale of the building is not appropriate, item 4 on page 12.
Any others?
No, Mr. Chair.
Why am I have one on page 3, item 1. In the, after specifically the site of what was unique about this site were the corner steps
Yes.
and the underground garage. That should be considered. Any others? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstain?
We have some abstentions. You, Mr. LeBoy, and Suding. Item 2 for you,
Yes, please.
and Suding 3 and 4.
Thank you.
Thank you. That is correct.
Item C, the consent calendar of March 8th.
Item A, 1336 Alta Vista Road, received product design approval and final approval. Item B, 1029 State Street, received final approval with comment that the corners of the fountain have a chamfer of approximately 6 to 8 inches. Item C, 607 State Street, received final approval. Item D, 205 Natoma Street, was continued 2 weeks with comment to return. With various details. Item E, 506 Japala Street, received project design approval and final approval. Item F, 1919 Santa Barbara Street, received project design approval and final approval. Item G, 920 Chapala Street, received project design approval and final approval. And item H, 35 State Street, received approval of review after final.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mahan, I believe, for doing the consent calendar.
I'll make a motion to ratify the consent calendar of March 8th.
Suding, Julio, Vena, second.
Suding abstains from item H.
Any other abstentions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? None. Motion carries. Staff announcements?
I had one announcement, and Nicole Hernandez has another announcement. So, not on this agenda, but for March 22nd, we'll be reviewing a project at 1601 State Street. This will also be going to Planning Commission on April 6th, and story poles will be installed for the site visit on April 4th. We would like to see if one of the commissioners is available to attend the meeting to summarize HLC's review of the project. So that would again be for April 6th at Planning Commission. And we're reviewing it on March 22nd, so next Wednesday. It's the El Prado, and they have several mods that they're requesting. So you've already seen the project before, but they missed a mod, so that's why it's returning.
The El Prado Motel, Hotel?
Yes.
Okay, with the tower.
Mm-hmm.
Good, okay.
So we just needed
that's a
one
long time ago.
volunteer. Yes, it did. So they were just about to go for Planning Commission, and when they noticed the additional mod.
Not on the 6th. Can someone else go?
Well, I would volunteer to go, but I'm not an architect. I think I can maybe handle it.
We're going to see it next week?
Yes, on March 22nd.
We
Okay.
wait till then because
Well,
we
wait,
don't
well,
have our
wait
Wanna
till
wait
then.
till then to
I
make a
don't
decision?
remember that we had any problems with the final approval of that.
Didn't.
So we can forward our comments from that meeting to the planning commission.
Okay.
Yep. Any, Nicole?
Okay.
Thank you.
So we had a training yesterday on the new state law, the new accessory dwelling unit. State law passed January 1st. I wanted to let you know some of the implications right now because it made our ordinance null and void until we can write a new one. And it's the accessory dwelling unit ordinance. Well, so the biggest thing is that no design review is required for any historic resources at this time until we adopt a local ordinance that complies with the new law, which will be 4 to 6 months. So this, even then, when we adopt it, it may only cover buildings listed on the California Register. We have 50 buildings in Santa Barbara listed on the California Register. But most of them are commercial, so they won't really apply because you have to be a single family residence and you have to be owner occupied of one unit. So that that'll impact those buildings. Most of our single family homes probably would not meet the threshold to be listed on the California State Register. So, and I talked to the SHPO yesterday, and to nominate something on the California State Register, you do need a National Register nomination form, which is very intense work. So this is what we know so far until we get our own ordinance adopted, and our attorney is working on it. And the other implication is no parking is required in historic districts. This currently includes EPV, Brinkerhoff, and the Lower Riviera Special Design Districts. So if they add an accessory dwelling unit, no parking will be required for those properties. That's the state law, and that's what we do.
That's the state law. So even, excuse me, Judy. So even if we adopt an ordinance, that ordinance cannot restrict this potential development.
Right, we have to comply with that. And
We have to comply with the state because they're above us.
yeah.
Welcome to the real world. Ms. Arias.
Mr. Limon, we had some discussion about this, and I'd like you to bring us up to date on things.
Well, the dilemma is that until the city adopts its own ordinance, the city cannot regulate it in the manner that we would like to regulate it. For example,
Don't tell people that.
well, it's the honest truth. And what I mean by the way is that we have some certain standards now. For example, they're not allowed in a high fire area. Well, until we impose that requirement, they are allowed in a high fire area. And so traditionally, those properties have not been able to propose. So until we close that ability, there are going to be applications coming forth. And we'll do our best to try to expedite it with our city attorney. But as you know, we have a lot of multiple efforts going on. We have this historic districting ordinance, we have the ENZO ordinance, some other ordinances, and it just has to wait its turn.
But how does, I mean, it's the state said we have to do this. Or you have
What
to
the
do it.
state is doing is trying to encourage these units because they recognize there's a shortage of housing in California. And in order to expedite it, they're trying to allow it to happen more rapidly. And the city's position, obviously, is there is a desire to still maintain a residential, single-family residential character to neighborhoods. And so what can the city do to still allow these to be created, but within certain limitations? And that's really the discussion that's going to happen when the ordinance comes forward. Can we implement something that still allows the process to be quick? Because they're essentially taking discretionary review away from the process. You cannot tell someone no, but you can tell them the manner in which they do it.
Oh,
Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Arias.
What is the law?
Excuse me, Kellen.
The reference.
Excuse me, Kellen. Callum, wait a minute, please. Ms. Arias.
I consider this a very serious threat to our historic preservation and our image of historic Santa Barbara. And I look at all the items that we have on the table, the NZO, the AUD, the whatever, and I look at this as being a real top-level threat to preservation in our city and the economy that preservation brings to our city. Therefore, I would suggest that the HLC take a stand and tell the city attorney that we want our historic elements, our historic, whatever you want to call it, atmosphere, elements, whatever, preserved and protected, and that we want him to research and put out something that will prevent this from becoming Anytown USA. Otherwise, we might just as well not bother meeting anymore. It's that serious.
Mr. Chair?
Thank you, Mr. Reyes. Mr.
Well, I'm
Grunbaum?
sorry, you may not agree with me, but that's the way I feel.
There was language I thought I saw about historic districts, and how are those? Is that instead of it being a particular historic structure put on the state registry, do the historic districts protect it or allow additional control in another way that might not be by individual?
I think we can nominate a historic district to the California Register. I talked to the SHPO about that as well. You can nominate districts. You just have to do the National Register form for the district.
What I think you're asking, Mr. Grunbaum, if I can reply, is staff will certainly ask our city attorney whether or not we could protect our historic districts and use that as a measure of further limiting them or determining whether we can analyze them for impacts to those district properties. So it'll definitely be a question, does it really need to be a California registered property, or can we in fact protect other structures? But we can't have that discussion until we actually start working at, which is Ms. Aria's concern about how quickly we get to that discussion. And another point is that we will have the biannual discussion with the council and the planning commission coming up next month. That would certainly be an opportune time because that's when they set our priorities, our work schedule priorities. And this commission could attend or actually write something to council so they can bring it forward with those discussions next month. We often invite the chairs to those meetings.
Yes, Mr. Mahan.
Does the new state law require parking for the unit?
No.
No.
No parking?
There are some allowances depending on whether or not there's, for example, in a bus stop within 300 feet or 500 feet,
They supply any parking.
so they don't have to supply any parking if there's that, right? So there is that ability to move forward without having to replace parking, even if you convert a garage.
Wow.
So
And
it's quite liberal.
But if our zoning ordinance, which requires parking for all of our residential,
Right.
if you convert the garage, you'd be,
This preempts that.
really?
Yes.
Yes.
It's a state law. It
It's
preempts everything.
anticipating that garages would be converted and you wouldn't burden that conversion with additional parking requirements. So it's quite,
So,
again,
so do you have to replace the parking? If
No.
you're-
But isn't there, if you add every bedroom you add, isn't there
our
a
legislature did this.
parking
Yes.
okay, we're getting
requirement?
into a discussion, so I would encourage you, if you have
Chair.
questions,
Mr.
we'll move
Chair.
forward to it.
Okay, yeah, actually, we need to put this on the agenda for the next meeting,
Well,
please.
and if the purpose is to communicate with,
To communicate to
Council.
the city council.
Yes, that's fine.
Our concerns. So if you could outline, brief form as possible, just what the implications of this are to our neighborhoods. And we would then, after that, draft a letter to the city council wholeheartedly, asking them and begging them to please respond, make this a top priority.
okay.
Is that, I think that's all we can do. We can't tell the city attorney to do anything.
One additional thing I might, if for those interested, I can email around. The AIA did a summary with the or just has some notes from various architects when the county a couple weeks ago had a planning and building department summary of, and this was the main topic for it. I can forward
That
those
would be
around.
great, actually.
That's
would you
a
give it to
county
us?
thing, but there's a
no,
lot of
I mean,
overlap in the discussion.
Yeah.
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 So I have
That
two
would be
more
great.
quick announcements.
So if you would send it to Jaime, Jaime will send it to us.
Perfect.
Yeah, that was an H-bomb,
It's my
Nicole.
understanding it will be on our next
I
agenda,
know.
which is in a week.
Can we do that?
If our agenda isn't out yet?
already been
It's just been
published.
published.
And it can be amended to have something else put on. I think there is an urgency and it needs to be acted on.
We,
We will look at it. If we can do it, we'll do it.
Please do.
So two more quick announcements.
Give me a second, Nicole. If it doesn't get on the agenda, we can still draft a letter, can we not?
That's what I would suggest.
At the request of the chair?
Rather than have a discussion, you can just direct staff to work with the chair to draft a letter to council expressing your concerns, and then you could review the draft here as part of that discussion, which would be easier than having a big discussion about it.
Let's do that.
Okay.
Let's start it then.
All right.
So
Then you-
I will work with Nicole to draft a letter to city council, and then we'll review it.
Wait a second.
And I assume letters that go to the city council, also copies go to the city attorney?
Sure.
I'm sure,
Sure.
yeah.
We'll copy them. We have some more announcements?
Yes, Nicole.
Jaime is going to the ordinance subcommittee again of council, the ordinance committee, on the 28th. And after that meeting, we think we'll be ready to get a subcommittee of the commissioners together to start really looking at because after that is when the ordinance is really going to start building. And we will like to get a subcommittee together after that. So that's where that is. We wanted to update you on that. March 28th.
That's when we're at the ordinance committee, but what I wanted to clarify is that all it is an outline. And what we're doing is reorganizing Chapter 22 into 4 separate chapters to try to distinguish how we can create historic and special design districts. And once they give us direction that that's the format that they would like to pursue, we would like to come back to this ordinance, this Historic Landmarks Commission and get your input. But because it's such a long document, we're going to need to have a subcommittee to help us iron out some of the questions that we have.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Rios.
in reading this draft ordinance outline, I noted that you mentioned certain districts. And one of the districts that has been prominent by residents wanting to have a district has been the Bungalow Haven, and it's not in here.
The purpose is because there is no district yet. What we are trying to do is establish a procedure on how that district moves forward. And so once this ordinance is in effect, we can start rolling them out into one by one. And that's what our historian intends to do. So Bungalow Haven would be one of the first ones.
Because I've been hearing about Bungalow Haven for longer than I've ever heard of the Ellen Canto Historic District.
Well, that already exists.
Well,
That
that's
we're just-
a bit of news for me. I didn't realize
Yeah,
that.
that
But I know
exists.
that I get calls from people from Bungalow Haven wanting to know the status. So that definitely should be on the list.
It is on the list. It's not in the reorganized ordinance because it would have to be created. And
Okay.
we're going to do that subsequent to
All
that
right,
ordinance.
thank you.
Sure. One last item, or do you have another?
I have one, but
Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm excited to report also that we are going to reconstitute the sign committee. And that's something that was changed and altered in 2010 due to the budget cuts, the downturn in the economy. And we went from a 5-member board to a 4-member board, utilizing 2 members of the HLC and the ABR to supplement a process. So this is something I promised Louise Boucher before she passed. She promised that I'd bring it back, and I did my best.
And haunt you.
She would do that. So.
Bring her back?
Well, I would need to have some, we're going to try to time this in such a way that we take advantage of this recruitment period that's coming up. And hopefully council agrees. We're going to go to the ordinance committee on April 11th and subsequent to council to hopefully get them to recruit. What we're going to do is have a 3-member board to start, because I think it's going to be difficult to recruit a 5-member board. And I think the commitment level also will be lessened for our alternates. That way we'll have more people available. So I'm hoping you all could support that effort if that comes forward.
Well, okay.
And the final announcement is the Preservation Conference from the California Preservation Foundation is in Pasadena this year, May 10th through 13th. If any commissioners are interested, please let us know so we can plan for.
Thank you. Is there any funding for,
There is always an allocated budget, so we would like to know who's interested and we might have more information where we get a syllabus of the conference to see if any particular day would be preferable. And we typically try to send some member of staff to go and also
Chaperone.
bring back material to share with everyone to see what we can learn from the experience. But lately, we haven't had many attendees from the HLC. But I definitely want to send someone from staff to go, so we do that.
they're very informative. I've been to a couple years ago.
Yeah, if you can get a syllabus, that would
And
really help.
that one's nice and close.
Yeah.
That's it?
Actually, I do have an announcement, Mr.
Mr.
Chair.
Sudi?
I will be stepping down on item 5, number 11 West Pedregosa Street.
Thank you.
I alerted staff to that.
Subcommittee reports?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Drury.
I attended the Arts Advisory Committee meeting yesterday, and out of that came Poet Laureate was appointed. Her name is Enid Osborne. And the functional mural that was proposed to us was adopted and accepted,
Oh, cool.
and which with great enthusiasm. And there's another one at 123 at Santa Barbara Street, but that's ABR.
Ms. Sanchez,
And-
could you do the overhead, please?
I think that's probably the only thing that affects us.
And we haven't approved this yet. We have only approved it in concept.
That's right.
So
That's
it will
right.
be coming back
It
to
will
us
be coming back.
when we have
Yep.
the, what do you call it?
When the draft
When
of
it's a
the
painting.
yeah,
It's a
exactly.
marquee when it's a sculpture, when it's conceptualized,
Thank you.
if not done. Thank you.
There is one more thing that was very interesting, if you don't mind.
No, please.
They're developing a social media and software network, and there's a it'll be something that the public can access in terms of all the arts in Santa Barbara that are run through the Arts Committee, and it's something that we can just we'll probably have that up and running by summertime.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you for attending that.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. There's one other announcement. It'll
Yeah.
make it quick. Commissioner Vena and I met with the applicant at State in Mitchell Trena, that open space with the fountain and the coral trees. We discussed with them their strategy in removing the coral trees and thinning out the eucalyptus or the Corymbia citriodora. Just as a heads up, they will be coming to HLC for that, so I wanted to let you know about that. Thank you.
Thank you. And on the agenda is a notice, there will be a designation subcommittee meeting on Wednesday, March 22nd at 10 a.m.? And who's on that committee now? Okay, and is Femina still going to be invited to that? No?
Actually, I think we're moving forward to replace her with the mid-year recruitment. So
Okay, great. Okay. Thank you so much for being part of that committee. It's a great effort. Our first regular item is a miscellaneous action item. This is citywide recommendation. No, this is the infill design guidelines.
Mr. Baumann will make the presentation.
Mr. Baumann,
Lucky
welcome.
you.
All right, good afternoon, Commission.
Afternoon.
You all recall seeing the first iteration of the HLC infill design guidelines, I think it was November 2nd. They were before this commission. There was an early draft created by an HLC subcommittee that came to the commission, and last year the commission recommended council adopt them. From that point, staff went over and started working with the ABR to do similar guidelines or the same guidelines for the same projects, primarily the newer average unit density incentive program, AUD projects that we've been seeing a lot of lately. So we began working with the ABR, and the guidelines kind of have evolved quite a bit since you saw them in November. And the ABR had a lot of input in that, and staff had a lot of additional input into that. And the draft from the ABR went back to the HLC subcommittee, and there was a lot of bouncing back and forth with staff going from ABR to HLC subcommittee. And we ended up with one set of guidelines that are verbatim the same, except where it says ABR, it's just HLC. So we're pleased that we're able to get everyone in agreement, and we've got one set of guidelines so there's consistency for applicants citywide, inside and outside of EPV, whether they're reviewed by ABR or HLC. And we emailed this document to you last week with your packets, so I hope you all have had a chance to review it. I wasn't going to go into great detail, maybe just hit on a few of the high points of that.
Johnny, could you mention what happened at Planning Commission?
Yeah. Oh, also, after we got the HLC subcommittee and the ABR on the same page, literally, with the guidelines, the Planning Commission had a review for their comment. So the Planning Commission reviewed what we put together, and just for comments only. And there was several public comment there. I don't know if we have any today, but there was quite a bit of public comment at the Planning Commission. Oh, let me back up maybe a week or so. Mr. Lamone and I went to the AIA and met with them. We had sent a draft of the guidelines to the AIA, so we went and met with them and got their comments. And several of the AIA people showed up at Planning Commission and gave public comment there. So we had kind of various comments from planning commissioners and members of the public that we took back to the HLC subcommittee and back to the ABR with staff's recommendation of which, out of all the comments, which one staff recommends including and which one's not. So we had a couple of meetings about that. So in other words, the Planning Commission comments and the public comments have been taken into consideration in the draft that we sent to you. And then y'all are, to kind of orient you where this is. This is your HLC guidelines that I'm sure you're familiar with.
That's okay.
And that document is in three parts. There's the general architectural design guidelines, part 1, and then part 2 is all about landscaping, and then part 3 of that document is meeting procedures. So everything we're talking about is in part 1 in the architectural guidelines. We didn't alter the parts 2 or 3. So that, again, the draft we sent you is just to save paper. We didn't bother printing parts 2 and 3 since nothing changed in those. So what we're showing you is part 1 of that blue document.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
We have to open public comment first before we get into questions. Are you done with your presentation?
There's probably a couple of things I should mention
Okay,
on here.
please do.
We've got it on the screen, the draft document. Let's see. It's all the red text. And also another thing about the existing document, we didn't delete anything from it or modify what was in it other than what was necessary for pagination and to merge it. So all the red text track changes are insertions. There are 2 new goals. Let's see, 4 new goals. There are 2 regarding El Pueblo Viejo, just for HLC. That's one difference because ABR didn't reference EPV in their guidelines. And then 2 new goals. I'm just going to go through rather quickly. And then I've got all the track changes in the table of contents. We go through the table of contents, and then we get into the introduction to the guidelines. And here we've just added to the paragraph about the guidelines that these are new infill guidelines. Let's see.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a
On
question?
page 1, go ahead.
Mr. Bum, you said in an email, I think your last one, about you put ABR when you meant to put HLC.
Right. That was a typo or not really a typo. I didn't search the document thoroughly, and there are a couple of ABRs in here that need to be changed to HLCs. So we'll make sure we'll change all those. I did a text search, and I found about 5 of those that we missed.
Oh, thank you.
So please don't be confused by that.
I was.
Okay, so one thing that's kind of important that was never in the HLC guidelines is reference to the project compatibility considerations. You know, it's important enough that we display it on the wall over here for your reference. So we put that in the document. And this was something that staff came up with. Particularly, it seems, with recent AUD projects that are taking advantage of the incentives offered by that program to allow higher density. Some of these projects tend to be big with reduced setbacks, maybe 4 stories, some of those AUD incentives. So we get applicants that design projects taking advantage of all those incentives, and then they have a struggle when they get to design review in terms of compatibility. So that's what this paragraph is intended to get to. It describes how, yes, you meet the zoning ordinance standards, your setbacks, building height, open space, etc. But a reminder that also, in addition to that, you must have design review approval, and the project must be found compatible. And let's see, and then all the black text is just existing. And there's another paragraph, a new paragraph I wanted to mention. Well, here's the Part 1 General Architectural Design Guidelines, and the new infill design guidelines just really fit neatly into that. So we just stuck them right in there. And it's got the purpose. You know, we talk a lot throughout these guidelines about compatibility. And there wasn't a definition of it in this context. So there was a lot of work and a lot of input in drafting a thorough definition of compatibility as it's used in this context.
Can we ask Mr. Mahan if, I had a note there about the tool, whether Mr. Mahan had a problem with that statement can be used.
What page?
Right, 1.3.2 compatibility.
What page is that?
Let me find it here.
It's one of my questions that I want to get resolved.
Well,
What page
I
is
don't
it?
know if the page numbers are working, but it's section 1.3.2.
15.
One point,
Sustainable building and site design, is that right? No.
That's 1.3.2. You sure you have the right number?
Page 18?
page 18.
We couldn't recollect if there was an objection to the word tool. I mean, we've mentioned that we're providing more tools, and whether this analysis
Here it is,
is really a
page
tool.
8 of the
And I had a note that
Where's the
somehow,
word tool? Oh, there it is, let's see.
do you recall that, Mr. Mahan?
Yeah, I'm trying to recollect it.
We could eliminate tool and just say can be used in evaluating it. This
Oh.
10 closest
Yeah, I
properties.
think we decided to take out the word tool.
That's what I thought, that we wanted to double check before we take it out.
We did.
Used in evaluating the neighborhood compatibility.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, we'll change that. So we've got this definition of compatibility, and then this is the other paragraph I wanted to mention specifically regarding projects proposed under the AUD program.
Which paragraph number? What page? If you
It's
can read.
following right after
Same page
that.
8.
The very next section, 1.3.3.
That's not the number on what I'm looking at. I'm at 1.1 point something.
Yeah, I am too.
1.1.3.
Do we have a format change?
Anyway, that's the paragraph
Page
heading.
8, average
Average
unit
unit.
size,
Right,
density
right.
incentive program. Got it. That's why. It's probably looking so quizzical at us.
So there again, that makes a similar point regarding the zoning ordinance allowances where, we're all trying to advance the objectives of this AUD program, but at the same time, there's got to be a balance between that and approving compatible projects. So that's the gist of that paragraph. And then we get into design techniques and approaches, and it's sort of a menu type approach where there's several design techniques and approaches listed under each category, and applicants are encouraged to choose the applicable ones, whichever ones fit their situation. One section is on building design, height, and massing, and there's several guidelines for that. And then the next category is site planning for open space and landscaping. We've got the entire part 2 of the HLC guidelines that are very detailed landscaping guidelines, but this is more like the initial design of a project with site planning to provide open space and landscaping with site plan design. And then several guidelines for that. And here's another one, an edit that I left as a track change. When we went to the ABR and they recommended adoption to council, at that meeting they suggested eliminating this last site planning guideline because they felt it was redundant, because following right after that last guideline, it refers to the landscape design guidelines in part 2 with regard to parking lots. So the guideline that they deleted was about parking lots having landscaping and planting requirements. But then right after that, it just says see part 2, and there's about a page or page and a half in part 2 specifically talking about parking lot landscaping. So they didn't think that guideline was necessary or
'Cause it was
redundant.
Redundant.
Also, if you understand, most of them are a menu approach, and this was just restating an ordinance requirement.
Right.
Yep, got it.
And then there's the next section is on livability and privacy, and this is something that we took from the concept of the single-family design board guidelines. This commission occasionally sees single-family projects when they're in EPV or when they're historic, and for an approval of those single-family projects, you have to make the neighborhood preservation ordinance findings, the NPO findings. And one of those findings says that you're consistent with the good neighbor guidelines. So this section of guidelines on livability and privacy was added for multifamily projects, really, to bring that concept of neighbor issues and privacy and livability to the HLC guidelines for multifamily, or for ABR too, for that matter, to bring those neighborhood issues and livability issues to multifamily guidelines, similar to what they have for single-family residential guidelines. So that's what that section is about. And then historic resources. This is a section of the infill design guidelines. And there's some historic resources guidelines document in the works, but this is just because we may have these infill projects proposed on sites or near sites or adjacent to sites with historic resources. We thought there should be some guidelines that take into account the sensitivity of historic resources with some of these bigger projects. So that's what this section is about. And let's see. And it talks about the two situations where you've got project sites that contain historic resources. If there's a historic resource on the site, it is under the purview of the HLC and also in El Pueblo Viejo. But then there's another category of projects that are adjacent to historic resources. And if they're not in EPV or another design district, those are under the purview of the ABR. So it just points that out, and it's kind of mimic the similar languages in the ABR version of these guidelines. And then we've got this section of guidelines specifically for projects that are adjacent to historic resources. These were actually, the first draft of these was in the draft Historic Resources Guidelines when they deal with adjacent historic properties. So we put those in here as infill design guidelines. I think that covers it.
That covers it. Thank you very much. I'll open public comment. Callum?
Thank you. I think this is a great document, and I hope,
Callum, you need to get closer to the mic.
excuse me, this is
Thank
a
you.
commendable document, and I hope it will go through. I hope and I commend everybody that did all the work on it, and it certainly will be helpful and maybe give some ammunition to us preservationists that I think some of these buildings that AUD wants to plunk down and throughout the city will be inappropriate. I didn't see where the term adjacent is defined. So it would be interesting to know what is adjacent. For example, is the project proposed for 835 East Cannon Perdido, which is a large, bulky building collection or building that's going to be just a block or half a block or a few yards from the Live Oak Dairy, better known as McConnell's, or the Cow Building, which is up for, hopefully for historic, for landmark status. So I would interested to know what the definition of adjacent is. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a speaker slip from Greg Wright. Would you come forward, please?
You can sit in this chair here if you want.
Would you begin by introducing yourself
Yep.
to the record, please?
Greg Wrights, Santa Barbara resident, and also with Rethink Development. Just a couple comments on the guidelines here. First, generally, it seems to be consistent with how the design boards have been addressing projects all along. So it's not a big change. I think you're just codifying it so that applicants understand it better, which I think is great. Just a couple things that I wasn't sure if they were defined in here as I was reading through it. Floor area ratio is introduced as a concept in number 4 on page 10 of this copy. I know pagination may be different. And I'm concerned if it's not well defined, I don't think it's part of Santa Barbara code, that might be misinterpreted somehow. So
Make sure it's defined.
Define it. What appropriate FAR is kind of seems like nebulous, and so may be a challenge for applicants to understand what's intended by that. I haven't read the whole thing in detail, so just want to point out my concern. And the other thing was over here. Oh, it seems to be favoring open space on the ground floor over private open space on balconies. And I just wanted to point out that especially for the AUD program, when that was being considered, it was a really important consideration that the open space be allowed on the upper floors for these buildings to work. So I understand that's a great goal, but I don't know how strongly it's being encouraged, and that having the open space on the upper floors, private open space, is an important part of that ordinance. So I would just have you look at that and make sure that that's not being excluded by these guidelines, even if you do want to encourage more ground floor open space. And then specifically to that, when you're talking about ground floor open space, if you go to the Mark, for example, there's open courtyards on the ground level, but they're above the garage, so that I don't know if that would count in this case, but that's, kind of low, but it's not exactly at grade or on grade. It's above the garage. So I just wanted to clarify that. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a letter from Virginia Reeling encouraging us in this effort. To summarize it.
Mr. Chair, can I respond to some of those public comments?
You may.
Mr. Kellum asked what adjacent means. I want to say that it means next to or adjoining something else, joining neighboring. So we try to define it that way. That's how it's viewed. Now, that's different than nearby resources. And we've tried to accomplish that concern by creating sensitivity areas. I've mentioned that to you in the past, that all our parcels are now identified with a sensitivity area around all our historic resources in town. So a potential developer comes in, they will know what's within the adjacency of the properties, as well as 100-foot distances for all our city landmark structures and National Register structures. So we do have a wider net. Now, the question that becomes that comes up that our historian, Ms. Hernandez, deals with is what are the impacts related to those distances? And she would make those judgments as she has at the 835 West Cañon Perdido project. The further away the resource, the less impacts there are, in our opinion. That could be across a street. That's the reality. So I wanted to address that. And with respect to floor area ratios, we do define it primarily for the purposes of single-family residential development. We do have a definition. We can certainly include that so there's no confusion. So there's a way for people to understand what that means. And as you know, at one point we placed a number in there and it was softened. And what we're thinking of doing is just acquiring data. So over time, you'll see different FAR statistics being provided, and you'll have a comparison tool. That's all it is. Where there's no such thing as an appropriate FAR. What we're saying is we'll find that one day. Yet we don't know yet because we'll see different projects, and you'll be able to relate others and see if there's a preferred FAR size based on the number of stories.
We're in compiling phase.
That's correct.
Mr. Chair.
And you believe in Santa Claus and the Good Fairy, too?
Are you done?
Yes.
I need to close public comment to the commission for questions. Mr. Drury?
Mr. Chair, I was looking at page 14 under the projects adjacent to historic resources, and I was wondering if should, like item number 1, should is a strong enough word. Does that have enough authority?
I'm sorry, where?
I have page 14. I'm looking at under the projects adjacent to historic resources, the infill projects 1.2.3, and the next page, a list of ABR. It's basically the ABR becomes the review body. But I was wondering if in all these lists, if should is a strong enough word.
Well, sometimes it's not really appropriate to match an historic resource.
True.
Okay.
So should is a strong enough word.
And I just want to add on to that. That is one of the central questions that we do ask ourselves when we develop guidelines. And it's been consistently known that should is something preferred when it comes to a design guideline versus a shall, that there are no exceptions.
So we can determine that it might not be appropriate to do a faux East Lake style Victorian next to a real East Lake style Victorian, because one really can't do that anymore with much success.
Thank you.
And this is one of those words we landed on after a lot of input, where there was, on one hand, people thought it should say shall, and on the other hand, some people thought it should be softened to say could instead of should. So we picked should.
Okay. So we're getting into questions and comments. Mr. Mahan, questions and comments.
I have a blank page on 7. Is that supposed to be blank?
Is space intentionally left blank?
The illustration.
Am I missing something, or
No, I think there were blank.
I have the same thing.
it's okay?
You have to stare really hard at it.
Start to see something. It's on the other side.
We've worked very, very hard on these guidelines, and I think that they're excellent. And I think they'll be very helpful.
Thank you.
I'm pleased.
Mr. Sitting?
Nothing, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Reyes?
Yes, thank you. One of the questions I sent to Mr. Limon was the coordination or sharing of information between decisions at the ABR level and at landmarks, and so that we know what's going on and they know what's going on, et cetera, et cetera. And I received a response from him, which I think should be in the record, as to how this communication and information is going to be exchanged between HLC and ABR in the project. It is in the best interest of the applicant that we work together and we have an understanding. Would you like to respond? Or I have your written response right here, and I think that should be in the record, because there needs to be coordination and understanding between the ABR and landmarks.
Yes, what I wanted to explain to all the commissioners was that at one point this commission was suggesting some type of consultation process, and I think I offered a counter proposal, which I think would work better, which is our urban historian will provide recommendations on projects involving adjacent historic resources to the ABR. As part of those recommendation memorandums, they will be copied to the Historic Landmarks Commission as a standard protocol, and you will be informed of projects where there is potential impacts. And that way you'll be aware of the project, and then she'll be able to also report back either whether she was successful in convincing that these recommendations be implemented, and or approvals that were given that did not follow her recommendations. The second question you had related to that issue was whether or not the commission should appeal or should have the ability to appeal. And I've checked with our city attorney, and he highly recommends that not happen, that it just doesn't seem appropriate for one board commission to appeal another board's decision. However, he did indicate that there is an ability to have an appeal happen, and that he would prefer to have individuals or other groups step forward and file that appeal, and that the commission's input could certainly be considered by council when it comes to their decision making.
I'm not concerned.
Go ahead.
I'm not concerned about the appeal process or things like that. I am concerned that we keep informed what's going on. And so somehow I would like to see that incorporated into the guidelines, or you indicated it would be in the second sentence or third sentence
Yes.
down.
I indicated there's two methods to include our procedures. One is a administrative regulations document that will be coming forward as a companion document to our historic districting ordinance, and you'll be reviewing that because it all involves how we analyze impacts to and how we list properties on the potential list. So that could include a process on how these projects at ABR are referred for review or for not consultation. What I say is that they're referred so you're aware of them. But I'm going to stay away from consultation or courtesy reviews, because again, it's stepping on another charter board, which is the ABR. They have the right to make decisions also.
I just simply want our board to be informed
Yes,
and be
and
aware, and
we
that's
will-
what I've asked.
and you'll see that.
somehow or other, I want it written down, made very clearly in the record
We will do
that
that.
this is what will happen.
Yes.
Can I have my sheet back?
Yes. I assure you that we'll give you that in writing somewhere.
I think that's important for coordination and good review.
Thank you, Judy. How will that be done?
As I told you, we have these administrative regulations, and so we also have these draft design historic resource design guidelines that I'm still working with Nicole, because we still want to supplement them to address some issues that are coming up with our historic districting ordinance. So you'll see, you've already recommended.
We have already received an email with drawings. Did we not, last week? Did I not see that somewhere? Mm-hmm. And
Oh, yeah, no,
that was excellent.
yes, that's what we intend to do.
That's
But
excellent.
we're going to put something in, actually, our guidelines that says this is what we do when there's projects outside your purview, outside EPV.
That's fine.
Sure. Ask another question.
Yes. Well, we're not done yet, but
Oh,
go ahead.
okay. Tailing
Go
into
ahead.
this. Part of this. Is there, and then how do we then give our recommendation or weigh in on it? Does it have to be by showing up? Can we send it someone designated? Does it have to be by showing up as an individual? Can we actually send a recommendation just via staff? How does that work?
Right. There are logistics involved when to file an appeal. Obviously, there's 10 days. Sometimes you will not be able to meet within the time period to make a decision on an appeal. So what we would be doing is notifying you of the approval decision. It could be through an email notification to all commissioners. And it would behoove you all to find or advocate some group to file appeal if you feel strongly for doing that. You could also, if you do happen to have a meeting prior to the appeal filing deadline, have that discussed and directed to evolve
But
yourself.
if it's not on the agenda,
Well, we would make an announcement. This decision has been made. The filing deadline for an
Under
appeal would be
announcements.
under announcements, and it would be up to you to how you would deal with either pursuing an appeal by a group or an individual to do that.
we as individuals can file
Yes.
an appeal.
Yes. That we're
But not as a group.
Yes, that's what we're
Understood.
suggesting you do that.
Understood. That just makes everybody mad at everybody else. Been there, done that.
Yep.
Mr. Vania, do you have any comments or questions? I have, I guess, a few. It's an excellent document and very well written and very easy to understand, which is rare in ordinances and guidelines. You usually get tangled in language. I'm also very happy to see quality of life issues addressed in a design guideline. It's probably more important than picking out the right color white. And, you know, I've always felt hamstrung in looking at projects and going, I wouldn't be caught dead living in there. I'd rather go die. I'd rather go live in San Bernardino. Oxnard's kind of nice. San Bernardino, downtown San Bernardino, than live in one of these units. So I'm very happy to see this included as a consideration for both the applicants and us. The only thing that I really have a reservation about is on page 30, porches. Page 30, porches. And I've seen some porches added on with this board's approval onto historic structures that I really wish hadn't happened. And so if that happens with approval, God help us without approval. They're sort of like, you know, the makeup on a building, and it's the first thing one sees from the street. So while they are to be encouraged, I still think they should be reviewed by somebody.
Mr. Lavoy,
Staff.
are you suggesting that you do not want that as an ability for staff approval in the future?
I'm concerned about it.
Okay.
And it depends, you know, some staff are more talented than others.
We can revisit these guidelines. So there is a second phase of these updates. And I would recommend that we include that discussion in that second
Okay.
phase.
I'd recommend it as a consent item
Yeah.
rather than a staff item.
We can certainly consider that as a change. And what we'll do is come back with that second phase because we have some additional changes having to do with electrical equipment and backflow devices that we would like to insert. And at that time, you'll be looking at that list and you could propose any changes at that time.
Great. So anything else?
Mr. Chair?
We send this forward with a recommendation to City Council for adoption.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Drury.
Before
before we do that, I'd like to commend everybody who worked on this, Mr. Bell and Mr. Lamone. I'm looking at page 11, livability and privacy. I know we kind of wrestled with what that meant. I think this is a really concise and well-written guideline in the opening paragraph. I think it's a really, really necessary. Sorry? Well, 11 and 12. And I think it's a really important part of this document. I'm really pleased how it turned out. Thank you guys for all the work.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Mahan.
I'm prepared to make a motion to recommend to City Council the adoption of these guidelines as submitted and discussed.
I second that.
Any further discussion?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Drury?
is there any enthusiasm for the proposal included paragraph by Ms. Frayling?
No. Well,
Okay.
you can if you wish.
I think it's strong enough.
Well, I have to make these findings here?
No, just, this is her recommendation. is in the quote.
The Historic Landmarks Commission is recommending these proposed guidelines for adoption by the City Council. Intend that the guidelines will always be interpreted with reference to the power and the duty of the Historic Landmarks Commission under City Charter, Section 817.
Does the seconder agree?
Yes.
Is there any further discussion?
No, sir.
Under discussion, would the maker of the motion agree to the very strong request to include a method of notifying the commission of properties adjacent to historic properties and how they've been?
Yes, that's what I intended when I said as discussed.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? You have a recommendation. Thank you very much for all your hard work.
Thank you, subcommittee.
Many thanks to Commissioners Grumbine, Arias, Mahan, and Drury for all their time and hard work as the HLC Guidelines Subcommittee.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Here, here.
Mutual.
Our next item will be a concept review for 1703 Chapala Street. Could the applicants come forward, please?
I'll be back in a couple of minutes.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Well, we're back. We're back. Thank you.
I'm just going to
Yeah,
get
they
rid
do.
of this.
Thank you. If you'd introduce yourselves for the record, please, and then I'll begin.
Do we have minutes from the last meeting?
Yes, we do.
Tim Hazeltine, Post Hazeltine Associates.
Welcome. In the last meeting, we continued this 2 weeks with comments. The first, a larger window well on the Chapala Street elevation is necessary to show how emergency access is provided. The second item, the width of the concrete landing at the bottom of the porch should be the full width of the porch as shown on the landscape plan. The columns and the elevation should be shown as they actually exist, with the necking of the columns lining up with the fascia board. The drawing should clearly reference how the louvered windows are being removed. As presently proposed, the commission cannot make findings that ADA accessible aisle and parking space modification is consistent with the character of the neighborhood and house. The area should be further studied for solutions to include more landscaping as a buffer and exploration of the use of a stone wall. All of the railings used on the site must be compatible with the architecture. The location of the oak tree adjacent to the Valerio Street side walkway should be accurately shown with the pavement treatment in that immediate area. Provide a photograph. The commission finds that the garage modification is aesthetically appropriate and does not pose consistency issues with HLC guidelines or the neighborhood preservation ordinance. That was passed with Suding opposed and Murray absent. It seems that the most important thing is the landscape, since we have that in front of us, and how is the encroachment being mitigated. Gentlemen?
So do we not want to go over the items one by one? We want to start with that one?
Let's start with that one.
Okay.
So we restudied the way that area buffers, and we incorporated a planter area that, thank you. That's what that's for. Incorporated some planting areas at the end of that parking area to help buffer the parking from the street, to soften that a little bit. We studied several different approaches to the screen there, and perhaps we didn't explain well enough what our concept had been in terms of that buffer. And if you look on sheet A4, we have several different versions of how that screening can work. Our preferred concept is that that there is a structure there that supports vine material that basically fills in and creates a green wall. So that was what we were hoping to propose, and maybe continue or replicate the sandstone curb at the base of that. We also studied if that instead were rather a hedge. That's scheme B as you see it here. So that we would be planting a hedge in that area. And even though it's fairly thin, there's some hedge materials that we feel could work well in there to screen that as well. A third scheme, obviously, was to look at a stone wall that would happen in there. There's a fair amount of slope, so we're limited by the height of that's allowable adjacent to the roadway there. So 42-inch maximum, and we're losing about a foot over the course of that wall. So it's a little shorter at that end. Also, we have to think about our proximity to that oak tree. So we can't get too close to it, and obviously the closer we get, the more we need to very carefully mitigate stepping on its feet there. So we also looked at maybe incorporating some of the historic forms of fencing, the sort of a post and rail fence that with a wire structure in between. Then again, vining would be attached to as another method for screening. And our last approach was to actually replicate again the sandstone curb, continue it through that area, and do a traditional picket fence, close pickets. Small pickets matching what's happening across the street on Chapala Street there. So it's basically a 3-inch picket with a 3/4-inch space. Does a fair amount of screening.
Before you move on, you talked about on the first solution is a structure. What's the structure?
Actually, it's on the best example of that would be on this page.
Kind of like a green screen?
Yeah, actually, and this, we worked with Post Hazeltine quite well, and they produced a memo, and we went over all, because the last time you were here, you folks had asked on some of the fencing. And so my intent always was, and in fact, because we have a hedge around the property, and then with the notion was trying to create a barrier to keep the owner's pet secure. And so this first one that's labeled right here, I kind of like as an example to basically be able to effectively bury, let the hedge kind of grow through, and so you have the security, and then it just basically reads as a hedge or a green wall. And also the other part of that you folks had asked for that I think was a nice idea, by kind of opening up the end there, we're able to get kind of a nice little kind of sculptural tree in that little planting pocket. So certainly the landscaping is far more interesting and meaningful than the thin strip that we originally had. So,
Which is your preferred option?
my preferred option would be to do the wood railing with the wire mesh in between, because we are doing that elsewhere on the site, and I think that would be nice and simple and read kind of as a hedge form.
Yeah.
Which item, which letter is that?
I.
Aye.
I have ABC.
He's
One.
it's I on my plan.
It's on this plan, I think it's D on.
B.
D.
B as in boy?
D as in dog.
D.
You have two eyes, though. I mean, I know you have two eyes.
Well, actually, the reason I have two eyes is because they're both wire fences. One has wood incorporated, and one is all metal. So they're both examples that actually Tim here did a report on, and he could elaborate further if need be.
Okay.
We redrew that elevation to look at it from the streetscape, obviously, and tried to show you what you're going to see.
It's street level.
Street level, yes.
So, not yet. Okay, so going down the list.
Going down the list, well, starting again at the top.
A larger window well?
Yes, we made the window well larger. 9 square feet is what the building code requires. We're at 36 square feet, so it's significantly larger. And when they're deeper than 44 inches, you have to provide a permanent ladder, and we have a permanent ladder proposed built into the back of that. We're about 5 feet is what I figured we'll be. So the concrete landing, I drew a little more accurately to show the paving that we had proposed, and my drawing was slightly different, but he has these little areas that sit beside the brick paving in the middle, and then there's a little, what are those?
Brick.
These little pieces.
It's just brick.
Just brick.
Just two panels flanking them.
Yeah, separate panels.
And then the columns?
The columns were redrawn to, not that we were meaning to change them, they were just drawn slightly off of where they should have been, so they're realigned. That's the way they should be, and
The louver window?
louvered windows we referenced
I saw it
at
somewhere.
every window that's being moved, and we had a note on the north elevation that talked about that in general, but now we're actually pointing to each window. This one's kind of hiding behind the tree, but pointing to each window that's being replaced. There are 3
Okay.
that are being removed.
We did that. Railings, show us the railings that you're proposing.
So our railings are shown there on that elevation on A4, as well as also on A3. But
Do you have a detail?
we don't at this point, but we'll be back to you many times. We're looking for concept at this point, and so we will flesh that out much further. But the concept was post and rail with a picket.
Actually, I did. It's again referenced in Tim's report, but that was the purpose of that. Is one possibility is doing a painted kind of lattice wood gate. Yeah, that's one possibility. That was again in Tim's report. You know, we are at, as Brian said, we're at concept, and we know we'll be back many times, and those kind of details, we feel like.
But we're hoping that you don't have to. That's what we're trying to
We're used to the pattern. I
One
guess.
quick comment about this. We sent this image to the architects just to give them an idea about the grid pattern, because on a historic metal fence, the grid pattern should be rectangular, not triangular or diamond shaped. And we believed if this type of fence would be used, it should have a simple post with some sort of finial, because likely the top of the fence may not always be completely vegetated, and that finial type should either be a sphere or something triangular, but something traditional in form. So the part that you would see after the greenery had grown over it would just be that top portion. That would be more traditional. We favored the wire fencing to some extent because we wanted to reduce the visual, the appearance of a lot of hardscape, even if that was a wood fence, that there would be these too many layers of a retaining wall that's stone and a big board wall and then other things. So we thought the greenery would blend sufficiently into the landscape not to read as some big other hardscape feature.
What's your historical preference on wood versus metal posts?
There'll be a time for questions, Mr. Suding.
Also, we did address the railing in the back. Maybe that's what we were also talking about.
Yes.
I forgot about that. So we have an area that we do have an actual ramp. We have to slope fast enough. So we have guardrails required. So re-examined that a little bit and thinking of a molded solid steel painted rail with as simple as possible with the molded top rail with the lamb's tongue returns. Obviously, you have to have your handrail extensions, and so I'm adding another rail post to accommodate those, but trying to keep the railing as simple as possible without having it get too complex. But that was my concept at this point for dealing with that.
Okay, anything else that's new?
The oak tree, we have, as accurately as I could, shown where that sits on both on the site plan and our elevation there. And we have some photographs and drawings here depicting the oak tree from the sky there, showing it where it's happening here at the edge of the sidewalk. Actually, I think edge of sidewalk is slightly to the city side, because if you line up the curb beyond, I have my, well, I probably don't need to roll that out, but I have my survey also that shows me that that tree actually sits kind of right on the property line. It's bisected by it, so it's a little further towards the street than I had shown it previously. But trying to document that and show it kind of accurately in the elevation there as well.
Thank you. Is that it?
Yes.
Thank you. Open public comment. I have no speaker slips. I'll close public comment. Oh, I'm sorry. What did I do with it? This one.
Got a letter.
I have an email from Ashley Brilliant, who and his wife, who live across the street, and Peggy Sue Lemquill. They note that they have already communicated their concerns to us and received no indication that the noise, traffic, and general disruption involved in this project will not seriously affect the quality of our lives and those of other neighbors. Nor have we been told how many months all this will go on, during what hours, and on what days of the week. We would at least appreciate some assurance in these matters, some evidence that those involved in the approval or execution of this project care about all its general effects on the neighborhood. That's my letter. I'll close public comment to the commission for questions.
Mr.
Mr. Drury.
Yeah, so I got a comment of double reading on the fence along Valerio in terms of what do you prefer?
You know, the preference is basically the wire fence, and part of that is, I think it's in the best interest of the oak tree.
That's the one with the finials that Mr. Hazelton was.
That's one.
This one here?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and again, the notion is to let a vine or hedges kind of grow through it, and it becomes a green wall, and that is certainly in the best interest of not disturbing the roots of the oak tree and protecting the oak tree. So that's why we prefer that over a wall with a footing.
And how tall is that?
It's 42 inches max. Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. May?
I have no questions.
This one.
Mr. Suding, questions?
Yeah. As I understand it, you are proposing the wood post fence with the welded wire mesh. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So not the iron post fence with the welded wire mesh.
That is my preference. Again, we're open to.
Thank you. What type of plant material are you proposing to use on that green screen welded wire mesh? Have you gotten there yet?
Well, when I do a planting plan, I'll have that kind of detail. But there's, as you know, there's several vines. I mean, I even think Pittosporum, Marjorie Channon would squeeze in there too. So.
And the last question is, what type of permeable brick paving do you think you're going to be using? GAP or GAPless? You're going to use common red brick?
Yes.
With gaps?
Yes, actually, we have to do permeable paving.
Right, I
so it would have some kind of gaps in order to have the permeability.
Would those gaps be lugs, or would they just be, lugs on the side of the brick face, or would they?
And the other possibility, which is listed on my plan, in addition to doing common brick, is that Belgard Aqua Rock, which also looks like a brick paver and has kind of the little tabs and nubs on it, which is a permeable paver that
I'll
looks
make
quite
my
well.
comments
So,
when we're in comments.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
Questions, Mr. Rios?
No.
Commissioner Vena?
This paving that you're using, would you apply it to the walk at the entry as you start entering? Because it appears to be more like concrete in that area.
I'm sorry. Where are you referencing?
Around the open question.
Oh, down there.
That was.
Yeah, that's meant to be permeable paving again. Again, I feel that's the best interest of not disturbing that oak tree.
Maybe you could extend it into the public area too.
I'd love to. In fact, actually, if you look, the sidewalk's lifting up a little bit. So the reality is we will get an arborist involved. We'll probably root prune the tree a little bit, and kind of that sidewalk will probably be repoured during construction, I would think, and so that everything becomes a much better situation when it's all left.
You'll address it, I'm sure.
Sure. Yes.
Commissioner Grumbine?
Yes, on page A1, sorry, yeah. So a couple questions. So starting with the private outdoor areas down below, the lower level, that fencing, what's the fence material proposed down there that divides the three different private outdoor areas?
This one right here.
Right. The intent was to do some kind of, again, appropriate to the architecture, and we will work with the historian on that, but it is tend to do some kind of wood screen fence on those locations so that the individual tenants have privacy in those patios.
Okay, and so just to confirm, right now, currently it's not being shown yet in elevation, is that right?
Correct.
That's correct, yes.
Okay, then my next question was with the entrance, the brick landing, same site plan. So when you call out brick landing and the steps up, I'm just trying to understand, and then you have a little, right next to it, you have walkways shown in both directions too. I'm trying to understand what these patterns mean at the brick landing area.
I just kind of marginally showed the pattern. The paving is actually
It's all one flat landing?
Well, it's defined on the landscape plan. That's just kind of a minimum.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I need to just see it a little better, maybe.
Can you see it there? Right here.
Yeah, so is that just all pattern work? That's not actually a change in level or anything?
No, it's all flush, and then
Okay.
that's kind of a gravel path that goes off to the side. So there's a hierarchy of the pathways so that the brick reads as kind of the most important coming into the house, and then the two pathways that go off to the sides will read more secondary.
So those two skinny rectangles on either side of the main entrance right there and there, those are
brick.
Okay.
And in part because the brick landing felt so large. So that was just kind of a subtle way of trying to break that up. And I believe we discussed that at the last meeting as that was a reasonable solution.
Okay. That's all my questions.
Mr. Chair, I have one more question. This is for Mr. Hazeltine. Typically or traditionally, would that paving that leads up to the house and is, Mr. Fowler mentioned a hierarchy, and I can appreciate that. Traditionally, would that paving be brick or just simply scored concrete? I know that was, I think, one of your options. I know you wanted it permeable, but in your list here, you're calling out brick or colored concrete paving. So what is more traditional?
For the time period this house was built, it would be more likely that it would have been concrete or even asphalt, as the commissioner just whispered. And sometimes you still found just basically sanded paths. Brick was used earlier in the 19th century, and it came back during the period revival movement. But there was a period in the early 20th century, they thought concrete was wonderful, and they used asphalt extensively at the Huntington. They thought it was a wonderful material.
It was.
It was.
And actually, I lied. I have another question. So, regarding the report, so can you give a kind of a summary of weighing in on the fences, just sort of recapping what you're thinking?
Me.
Yes.
Okay.
What you're thinking from what the ideal fence is for various areas and why.
Well,
on the historic site.
From a historic site that has no historic fencing left, which is the condition we have, we like the fences. And in an attempt, you're not attempting to recreate a historic garden that once existed but it's not there any longer, and that's not the intent. Is that the fencing broadly reference the historic period in materials and overall form, but it not necessarily like copy a historic fence. Given that the lot is not enormous, we do like fencing to be the number of types to be restrained, so you don't end up with too many types. On this property, because you've got a side yard that's going to really function as a backyard to some extent, we were in favor of the green wall concept, where you could at least have a condition with the type of fencing you chose that would be the goal, not the goal, but that's what you'd end up with, is a fence that read less as a separate feature and more as part of the landscape, so that the house could still present itself as the biggest and most important thing on the property. And so we gave them a range of material types and fencing types as inspiration points, not, of course, not take this fence and copy it, detail for detail.
Okay. Great. All right.
Thank you. Comments? Mr. Grumbine, since you're...
Okay.
You're all warmed up.
That's right. Since I had no more questions. So I think that I'll buy that. I like that explanation, defense of it, defense of the fence. I do think that making it go away, as opposed to the picture that you had in your report of strong wood crisscrossing and pattern work, and rather it seems like you're going towards the toned down, much more toned down fence, which just really does disappear. And I think it makes sense for the property on the and for the use that it needs to do, which is to keep animals in. The use of that, whether that same fence is or not on the back area, it seems like this is such a different. The private outdoor areas are so different in their use and space, and that they're also hidden. It seems like that same type of fencing might not be the best solution for that area. That would be my first impression and impulse. I think that on the area of the oak, it makes sense to try to keep the oak as much as possible, and I would lean toward away from the stone wall and towards using that green wall. The hand railing, I think, is not there yet. It's definitely still in the sort of the Spanish lamb's tongue language going down. And it seems like there should be something that's more appropriate to the turn of the century nature of this house. And so that I don't think is there. All the other aspects seem to be fairly well taken care of in my mind. So I'll just stop there.
Commissioner Benya?
No comment.
Commissioner Reyes?
Yes, thank you. Regarding the wire fence, it's my understanding that in landmarks, we do not approve this type of fencing. And given our water shortage and restrictions on watering, I could support it knowing that it would be covered by greenery. But that's iffy these days. And so I have some concerns about that. And I also remain concerned about the unit which requires a ladder as an evacuation. I've never seen that, and it bothers me as a safety factor. In an emergency, to have to climb up a ladder to get out, it's not nearly as speedy and fast. You grab something, you can't manage the ladder. There's a lot of problems, and that bothers me as a living type of condition for whoever is in the unit. Thank you.
And that's a handicap unit, is it not?
They are accessible, yes.
Yeah.
I'd like to see a handicapped person go up a ladder to escape.
I'd like to see me go up a ladder to escape.
Yeah, right.
Mr. Suding,
Yes,
comments?
Mr. Chair, thank you. The wood post and wood rail fence with a welded wire mesh in a rectangular pattern is an appropriate solution for the screening of the parking and is appropriate for the pet containment fence as long as it's buried in a hedge. The fence that is at the parking lot should have a vigorous vine or vigorous shrub with it. Want the applicant, the landscape architect, to study and coordinate the paving material specifically for the Chapala Street entrance and the Valerio Street entrance. It may be that concrete is more appropriate as opposed to brick. Brick is difficult when you make it permeable because you have that space, and that's typically not how brick is installed with a space. It just doesn't look traditional. I'm not familiar with the Bellegarde one.
I'm sorry, so the brick is not?
No, I just want the applicant, the landscape architect, to coordinate with the historian on what or on the appropriateness of the brick versus concrete.
Okay.
I think it's the easiest way to say it. That is all.
Thank you. Mr. Mahan.
Yeah, I agree with the comments that have been made, and the ladder out of the well, that's a code requirement. I mean, I understand the concern that the Commissioner Arias has with if there were a handicapped person in that bedroom and had to escape, that would be problematic. But it's one of it is, you know, we don't live in a perfect world. That's the way it has to be, in my estimation. I think it's the project that's coming along nicely.
Mr. Chair?
Commissioner Drury.
I agree with the previous comments. I also would like to say that I wasn't enthusiastic about the project at first. I think a number of us were not. But I think that it's going to make the house actually more proud. And I think it's going to be it can be a showcase. I appreciate it. Thank you.
I have a question brought up by Mrs. Arias' concerns. Where's your second exit?
My second exit from,
From the underground units.
they're only required one exit with a emergency egress window.
Dive through the window.
Well, all single-family or all individual units are only required a second exit when they're over a certain square footage, and we're far under that square footage.
Oh, okay.
Can I jump in on that as well? Just in terms of the exiting, if we imagine that same, if it was accessible but via an elevator or what, if we imagine that same one on the second or third story, it would be even harder to get out of your bedroom window without someone with a ladder. So at least the ladder's there for you.
For your buddy to go alert the police or the fire.
It's not ideal, but if we just imagine it up in the air, it's the same situation. It
Sure beats a rope ladder.
Yeah.
My own concerns I'm uncomfortable with the fence proposal so far. And I'm on the side of the historian that, in our previous comments, that the railings need to be compatible with the architecture and broadly referential to the materials and design of the house, the original house. That there be consistency across the site. Period. I think they need a lot more work. And I'm really uncomfortable with accepting welded wire mesh as a fencing material in an historic property, except for anything but a chicken coop.
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Arias?
Mr. Chair?
Get Ms. Arias first.
One question. If you were to reduce one unit, could your handicap units be accessible in a manner that somebody could utilize them?
If we reduced one unit, we would no longer need to be accessible.
All right, then maybe you should consider that.
Mr. Mahan?
Yeah, the instead of welded wire mesh, a traditional, there is a traditional fencing that I think they call it sheep wire or something. It's rectangular,
Yeah.
but they're twisted.
The grid is created by twisting over each horizontal
Right,
down to the next.
You see it in agricultural
Yes.
places where they don't want to let and I think it changes as it goes down toward the ground. It's more dense.
Yeah.
And that might be a more appropriate than welded wire mesh.
Yeah, I think actually we used that on a restoration project out at Stowe House in Goleta. So yeah, it does work well.
And
So,
is it called
Mr.
sheep
Chair?
wire?
Sheep wire, I think
Pardon?
they call it.
Wire?
Sheep wire.
Usually.
Mr. Chair?
Locally.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to give you my comment on the fencing.
Yeah.
I had taken pictures of what was across the street on both sides, and that is where they have this stone wall, which is on the rest of the property, and then most of the other properties have the white picket fence above it, and that was my suggestion when he talked to me about it. I just wanted to let you know that's why. It's because I was taking it off the neighbors, and I just thought he should present as many options to you all as possible. Because
Confusion
he
is
does,
rampant. Yes, thank you. Thank you.
They have a mod appointment, and so they're trying to move forward to get that mod appointment, which is next week.
Yes.
I did want to second Ms. Hernandez's comment on that. So even if you do want this to return, another time or so to revisit the landscaping and different matters of screening, we do want to know whether or not you can generally support the accessible aisle encroachment.
You mean if we can find it aesthetically acceptable?
Yes.
Well, perhaps the fencing is problematic in this area.
Well,
and we simply go
what?
to the hedge.
Thank you, thank you. So, we have a proposal for additional landscaping as requested and a screening of some type and several options. Is what's being proposed, this is a straw vote, is what's being proposed aesthetically acceptable from the commission in order to move it forward to the modification hearing officer with a smile?
As long as
Yes.
the fence is wood. with
No,
wire.
a fence of some type, yet to be detailed and determined. They're proposed, okay, of some type.
I would say, I vote yes.
I would say yes too.
No? So, Arias, no. So, this would be a motion for an indefinite continuance
To the,
to the modification hearing officer.
so moved.
And with the comments that the proposed landscaping and potential screening of the accessible parking space loading zone is commendable and aesthetically acceptable to
As
the
long as
commission.
it's detailed appropriately.
Yes.
And that the commission looks forward to the further development of the fencing material throughout the property. That
Railing,
is
the railing.
railings and fences that are compatible with the architecture and broadly referential to the materials and design of the historic period of the house.
Yes.
There is remaining a concern about exiting out of the window well.
No, I don't have any, I think that's,
That
I
not
think
a
it's
majority,
acceptable.
that's a min-
It's
that,
acceptable.
okay. Then strike that one.
I'm sorry, could I have that clarified, what you just said?
Okay, I'm talking, speaking actually to your comment.
Yes, it's being struck.
I don't have a consensus on it, I don't believe.
Do you
I
have
doubt that.
consensus on every comment that's made?
That's what I'm expressing right now in the motion, is the consensus of the board in the motion.
I find that it's acceptable.
Does everyone else?
I find it acceptable.
I find it acceptable.
Julio, yes, no?
No.
Okay, I have two, well, okay. Expressing the consensus of the board that it is acceptable. And the changes, and this is a motion, Judy, so it's the consensus. You can vote against it. All other elements of the design are accepted.
Yes.
Talk about the brick versus concrete, please.
And further consideration of the paving for the property as appropriate to the prime interpretive period of the house.
Yes.
And can I have a second?
Second.
Yep.
Second, Drury. Any further discussion? Commissioner Reyes's discontent with the motion is noted. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Opposed.
Two. Suding and Reyes
And you have three.
and Benya.
My opposition is based on my previous opposition, which I believe stated something as overdevelopment of the property.
Yes, it was. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 in support. The motion carries. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
I haven't received any, so I need to keep one.
We had it set for you folks.
No, these are the ones. Yeah.
We'll need,
Okay, so I
Mary?
need to keep one of the
Mary?
landscape and one of the.
I don't want to deal with it right now. We're going to take, I'm actually going to take a 15-minute break. Do you have to step down on this one?
No.
Okay. I have to go to, I have to go to the desk, so you may have to start it.
Grab your coat, don't forget your hat, but leave your worries, leave 'em on the doorstep. Life's sweet, just direct your feet to the sunny side of the street. Hop, bottle, toodle, sad, pitter pat. You know that happy tune is my step. Life's a reap if you dig that beat on the sunny side of the street. Used to walk in the shade with my blues on parade. What a drag, old man, getting stuck in the shade. Get hip, don't be afraid, move it on over, kill yourself in the clover. Only hit for a cent, who cares? Rich as Rockefeller, can't be beat. Gold dust round my feet on the sunny side of the street.
All right. We're an hour behind.
While you were gone, we all agreed we want to get out of here by 5 o'clock.
You want to get out of here by 4 o'clock or 3 o'clock. Henry,
Well, I'm not counting on
welcome
3.
back. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
Cold and the Guinness warm.
There you go.
For the record, my name is Henry Lenny Design Studio.
Greg Christman with DMHA Architecture.
Carlos Luna, Los Agaves.
Could oh, great. Could you briefly tell us what you're doing?
Yes, we're going to take the old España El Torito building and turn it into, half of it will be Los Agaves or something like that, and the other half will be.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you need to get closer.
And,
Get closer to Henry.
okay, and the other half will be a sushi restaurant. A sushi.
Sushi. Okay.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter, Callum. Henry, please continue.
As I was saying previously, the building has been a restaurant for many years, a veterinarian hospital, and back in the 1930s, it was a gas station. And I know.
That was Dr. White.
That was, I think so.
Really?
And so over the years, they've been adding things, one layer to the next. And now we're here to try to see if we can clean things up a little bit and make it more into the fit within the ordinance. And let me very quickly just go through it. This is the site plan. This is the old, what was it? It was
Bicycle.
surf and sand here.
Links.
We're then now taking this building, splitting it in half. Carlos is going to take this half, and some sort of an Asian restaurant will take the other half.
Okay.
All right. And so what we're doing, we're actually removing part of the building. The building line comes to currently to here. We're taking away, in Carlos's space, we're taking away the roof all the way to the parapet. And in this case, we're leaving the projecting roof, but replacing the walls that exist with some columns. And the main entry to the sushi place would be here, and Carlos's entry would be here, simply because it's nearly impossible, the ADA, to come in here. This will become a dining and a bar patio area, and this would become a dining patio as well.
Okay.
Okay. And Louis Massetti did this, if you can remember this.
Come on.
I don't know.
We like them once.
Oh, we liked them
I was-
once?
You were on the board then. Come on.
I remember.
I wasn't.
That's kind of a cute building, isn't it? No, I don't know.
It's okay. Next time.
And so, anyway, these are the drawings and
Of the existing.
existing drawings, and so very quickly. This is the sushi restaurant. And try to fit a Japanese restaurant into the Pueblo Viejo is a little challenging. But I thought that what we try to do is to try to do exactly that, is to keep it within the Pueblo Viejo, but still give some semblance of the fact that this was going to be a Japanese restaurant. And I did that by creating these telephone poles or poles that would be painted in the traditional red. We found a wonderful antique whole entrance that we're gonna see if we can retrofit. And then this is Carlos's place. This is the existing bar, and this is that little patio area that we talked about. And the windows in the bar area would basically open up to the outside. This really bothered me. And I was trying to fantasize the building, and it didn't work. No, it didn't work. And so instead, and I just showed this to Carlos, I just thought that we should be a little quiet, be a little more adventurous someplace else. So instead, we just simply divided the building into several components, the existing, the bar area, and the main entry area with the sitting in front, and then left this as a porch with a roof on top of it. And then it just became simpler.
Okay, and that's your iron?
Yeah, and then, one of the problems that we're having now because of Title 24, Judy, we're talking about that. Can't do anything anymore. Because of Title 24, if you break the windows up, they don't pass Title 24. So none of the manufacturers make broken up windows. So I'm working with the steel fabricator out of Mexico, and this is an actual true broken up things that receive the glass on both ends. The rest of it is an applied, but they're still windows anyway. And that's about the only way we can make Title 24.
Okay.
So anyway, this is my preferred.
Can I see that one?
This is my preferred solution, and Carlos just saw it and he liked it.
Could we put this on top of what's there now?
Yeah. So it goes from that to this.
You're raising the edge line.
Well,
Sorry, that was a question, never mind.
But it's a good explanation. What happens when you remove the overhang, you go back to the parapet in the back, and it raises.
Okay. Anything else you want to show us?
I think that's it.
Okay.
One other thing, landscape-wise. We will have some spots in the seating area, and I would love to have some, the flowering pears.
Evergreen pear.
Not evergreen, the flowering. And because I'm trying to, yes. I'm trying to avoid using umbrellas and so on. And the flowering pear, if we get them large enough, will provide enough shade. And here in the courtyard, we will put something like king palms or cocoa palms or something like that.
Thank you. Open public comment. I have a request to speak from Callum. Comments, please, Callum?
Yes. I'm just wondering, does the existing building, I don't know when it was built, does it have any historic integrity at all? And I'm not fully, from these pictures, it looks, is it going to fit into is it going to be compatible with the surrounding building or the surrounding buildings, which are, I guess, the next building down is going to be the lighthouse building. I mean, it's being redone. I don't quite remember where the lighthouse building comes. I can see it in that picture, but I don't know where is it going to be adjacent to the lighthouse building. So I wanted it to be compatible with the surrounding or buildings, and especially since it's on Cabrillo Boulevard, compatible to the fountain and the Stearns Wharf.
Thank you. You don't.
I just wanted to respond about the historic assessment. So Nicole isn't here to speak on behalf of it, but this isn't it's not on our potentials list, and it's not found to be a historic resource. Yeah.
Thank you for that clarification. I have no other speaker slips. I will close public comment to the commission for questions. Mr. Drury.
What that Campanile is attached to, is that the building behind?
That's the only thing left of the historic building.
Oh, okay.
That was part of the gas station, and that is attached.
Okay.
It's
okay,
buried
good,
in the building.
Good.
And that's going to remain.
And then, so the in that illustration, the entrance on the left is going to the sushi.
Sushi.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. And this will be the entrance of
Right.
Carlos Los
Thank you.
Agaves.
Mr. Mahan?
I don't have any questions.
Mr. Suding?
Two questions. The fenestration, particularly here and here, and then these two up there. Is this what's existing, sort of a kind of a loggia type window, if you will?
It got worse.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really bad. It's all plywood. Yeah,
have
the
any photos?
photographs are there. We
Okay.
can go back to
Okay.
that if you want.
And then this, it looks like you're opening it up.
Yeah, and removing the taper on the buildings.
Okay. And ADA just doesn't work? No possible ramping anywhere? They do, never mind, that's comment. Could we go back to the pictures then, please? Okay, so that's what's existing there as depicted in that drawing underneath.
Right.
And that's even worse.
Yeah, got worse.
Thank you.
Mr. Rios, any questions?
No.
Mr. Vania, any questions?
Not at this time.
Mr. Grumbine, any questions?
Yes. So I just want to be clear again, which of the elevations was the one that you were going for that central piece?
The rendered one.
Is the rendered one? Okay, not the one in the drawings here. Okay, and then just to clarify the entry doors here, the steel doors. So that's a steel frame that's in front of this all solid glass. Is that and that's okay. But then the windows here, are those all steel as well?
All steel.
And is that true divided light with the windows?
We'll try.
Okay.
And if not, we'll be using the same technique that we used in El Paseo, where it used to be leaded windows, and we'll apply the lead
On the surface. Gotcha. Okay. Great. That's it. Oh, you don't have any detail of what you're thinking of, or an example of what you're thinking of for that post, the Japanese.
It's just, I don't have a detail. My thought is just the typical Japanese post. It was either red or it was natural.
Okay.
And talk to me how that fits into the guidelines, which you helped draft.
I don't know. I was thinking El Presidio or something like that, but it's a bit of a stretch. And I'm open to your suggestions, Bill.
Well, I'm curious to see how you're going to solve it.
I do have a question, if I could.
Mr. City.
What is the storefront doing behind that?
That is all wood.
Is that showing up in plan?
About 9 feet back.
It's 9 feet back.
Okay, so it's broken up with some solid wall and wing or side lights and doors. Okay.
Yes.
Are we done with questions? Mr. Vania. Just a moment. Mr. Vania.
Assuming you're going to have signage and so on, and it's probably way early for that, where do you think you might place it on here?
Well, my thought is to take the corner of the sushi place and do. You know what I would love to do is the shadow light signage again. There's still a few left in town. De La Vina is one of them, but projected at a 45-degree angle. And there would be a pattern on the surface, milk glass, and then we'll put the name, and the same would be for Carlos. For Carlos, I'm not sure exactly where the location of it is going to be. We have to look at that.
Yeah, because this would, making it a part of the architecture, I think would be kind of a.
Yeah, I agree.
Sweeten it up a little bit.
Comments? Oh, wait, one other question, Mr. Drury?
Yes, I do. Are all these streetscapes, are they above the street level? They're not flush with the sidewalk?
The finished floor of Los Agaves is slightly above the finished floor of the sidewalk.
I think that's important to give a little elevation so that you're actually looking across the traffic. Coming and going, looking at how Stearns Wharf.
That was part of the thing, is to have it flush with the inside of the building.
Has to be flush with the sidewalk or
No.
slightly above? No.
We'll have a slight ramp, right? Isn't that much, very slight.
I have one question.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Put that back up there.
He's got it in his hand.
Oh, thank you. What is this material going around this door here? What is it?
Well, that's an antique door that I found. It's all wood. And then
Where did you find it?
I found it online. It's an old Japanese door.
Oh, it's a Japanese.
Yeah.
Didn't you used to have it at your Pedricosa Street?
Well, I had something similar. You know.
Questions?
Yeah, one more question, if I
Go
may.
ahead.
I just want to understand the tower, that not really that much of a tower, but that little tower element that's the entry for the sushi restaurant.
Oh, here.
So according to plan, it's in line with the posts, and the roof of that, but in the elevation, it looks like that is proud of. I just want to make sure I'm understanding it right. It's just the roof that's overhanging past the.
Yeah.
Okay.
That is correct.
It'd be like a dashed line going right there.
That is correct.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
Thank you. Comments? Mr. Mahan?
I think that it's going to be a great improvement over what's there. Breakup is very interesting. I think it brings a big building that was out of scale and maybe was shallow.
Clip too low, I think.
Those shallow arches. I think this is much more in keeping with El Pueblo Viejo. I'd like to see the picture, a photograph of the Japanese door to see if that's the only thing that maybe wouldn't be right and meet our guidelines, but it might. But I very much like the breakup, the way it's broken up now, and yes, and I think that reduces the scale considerably, makes it very, very human scale, and I think it's going to be an appropriate remodeling. But because the applicant is not wearing green.
Nobody, none of the applicants.
I suppose if
two of them I know aren't Irish.
I suppose if we require the building to be painted Malaga green. Anyway, no, I like it. I like the direction it's going.
I have one more question, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Vania. Mr. Vania.
In the future, assuming you're outdoor here and you have your prevailing winds, do you anticipate any kind of a glass deflection for the comfort of the?
I would like to resist that as much as I can. It's
Okay.
This is sheltered here, and this is also
Okay, just looking ahead, it gets a little. And then outdoor lighting as far as from above and.
Well, we'll have some pendant lights here.
Okay.
We
But
still.
Otherwise, we have some after the fact garage ones that start hanging down and.
No.
Catenary lights.
We'll think about it. I'll talk to Carlos, but I just don't anticipate anything. The spillage, if it's in the evening of the interior, would probably be enough. It's not a big area.
And the glazing that I'm speaking of course, if you think about it before, at least you can incorporate the thought into it before you get there after the fact. Just a thought.
It's a good thought. I'll think about that.
Do you have any comments, Mr. Vania? Other than incorporate, any comments other than incorporate the lighting into the design?
And the glazing, with wind deflectors.
Got it. Mr. Sudi?
I'll echo Commissioner Mahan's comments to the letter. I think those are good comments. It's going to be a very handsome, stately, attractive building there on Cabrillo Boulevard. The other comment is in your next submittal, in your next iteration, start resolving what happens to this patio when it meets the back of the sidewalk if you're keeping it at the floor level. Because if you look at the pictures, you can see, I'm sorry, the pictures are here. You can't see that the finished floor is there, or even maybe a little bit higher because there's another pair of steps in there. And how does that resolve itself as you come out to the back of the sidewalk?
We've been thinking about that. Yeah, we'll resolve.
So, quick comment, show a section going through from the sidewalk to the building facade.
Commissioner Reyes?
A couple of comments. Having lived and worked in Japan, I find the wooden door exquisitely appropriate, and also having spent much time in Spain where there are also heavy wooden doors, I think it is very appropriate. There has been no comment from this group about the style of furniture that is there. We have been very critical of furniture in El Pueblo Viejo, and we should look at this furniture and make some sort of idea. The other suggestion I would have is not to paint the wooden beams reddish or deep red, but to keep them natural wood.
All right.
I think that will blend more with El Pueblo Viejo, and also it is traditionally in Japan to have natural wood beams too. So I think you make the best by keeping them natural wood. Those are my comments. I think it's a really neat project, and I hope it works well.
Commissioner Grumbine, comments?
Yes, I echo the similar comments. Commissioner Reyes, I think, really hit it when it came to the wood and bringing out the fact that you're doing a great job, especially the tower roof. It shows off how you've kind of walked the fine line where you're finding the commonalities between Japanese and Spanish, and you're playing that game quite nicely. And so there are enough commonalities that it works. The only area that I see that still seems to be problematic is the glazing of the sushi restaurant being just so clean and modern in the glazing. And if there was some way of finding a screen type of pattern or something that could again walk that line between Spanish and Japanese, that might work. That might be work out better. But aside from that, I think everything else is looking really nice.
Thank you. Mr. Drury.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is a terrific project. It's been kind of an albatross down there for a long time, and thank God those scalloped windows are going to be gone. But I would like to see some sort of an elevation off the sidewalk. I think just for the patrons, I think it would be better. And I think that we've widened the sidewalk. I think part of that whole project is that we've made it more pedestrian friendly, because I think you're going to have a lot of people coming in and out of there, and that's sort of that and Fish House across the street is kind of the anchor for that little area right there. I'm very pleased with this project.
My own comments are mostly similar, although I'm going to miss this old building.
Yeah. Kind of, huh? I agree.
It was always sort of quirky, in an 80s sort of way. I think what you're doing in this part of the building works. I think this works. I don't think this works. I'm not sure this works. I think the door works, but I'm not sure that
We'll look at that.
looks too ordinary. When have I ever accused you of looking ordinary, Henry?
Yeah, I know.
I think this is really sweet.
Yeah.
And that's really sweet. And that's really sweet. And that could be sweet. And I think Commissioner Rios makes a good point. If these were wood, they would be more compatible with and you can stain the wood as deep a red as you can get it without being a lacquer red.
Good idea.
You know.
Brown, maybe brown.
And round, yeah, I think you are suggesting round. You know, as if they were made out of redwood, might work better.
I like lacquer red.
No, well, I do too, but not in EPV. And so that's where I'm slightly different than the other comments. So to summarize,
How about the furniture? You probably make a comment on the furniture. I have a comment if you're ready.
yeah, we can, I mean, well, is this what you want to use?
No, something like that. It's just the bistro chairs.
Yeah, well, too Spanish.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Drury?
For the chair.
Yeah?
So that the roof on the entrance to the Asian is acceptable. And how would you bring the part that is not accessible to you in line? Would you put the same kind of roof on over those two windows?
Yeah.
No, well, you know. Oh, I don't want to say that Henry's more talented than I am. I'm just pointing. I learned a lot from Henry sitting on this commission. I'm just pointing out to him that this needs his attention and this needs his attention without
Good enough.
giving him a direction.
Like now, I'm
I
sorry.
think that's sufficient. Poetry. It needs poetry.
Oh, yeah, you got that. That's what you're kind of duplicating.
That's really ugly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you've gotten rid of all this, and
Yeah, you're right.
Okay.
and you've kept the tower, and the tower's nice.
Mr. Chair, I'm ready to make a motion.
Sure. Do you want to summarize the comments?
Actually, we're comments only.
Comments only.
Comments, I'm going to make a motion for an indefinite continuance for the project to proceed with its environmental assessment with the comments that you have written down. Generally favorable.
And I will try to summarize it all. That we consider this a great improvement in the design of the building. That the breakup and massing of the building and the scale is appropriate to EPV. That we wish for further exploration of the round columns with the suggestion that they be left in natural wood. We support the use of an antique wood door, but wish to see a photograph of it. And that we would like to see the exterior lighting incorporated into the design and perhaps any future wind deflector and signage. We also want to see the relationship of the floor level to the sidewalk level and how it's being resolved in an artistic way. All those, second to that motion, please?
Second.
I heard Suding first. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
We'll see you indefinitely.
You could heat the floor.
I think we're actually.
I wanted to make sure you got those.
Yeah, you have to.
Yeah.
You can give that back to him.
Yeah, sure.
These are for you.
Good idea.
Well, have a nice weekend, you guys.
You too?
You mean it's not Wednesday? Just feels like Wednesday.
Our next item is 518 State Street. The applicant come forward, please. Gentlemen, if you could introduce yourselves to the record, please.
Vasalis Esparza, architect. And
Prashant Gupta from India House, 518 State Street.
Okay,
And
welcome.
that's the TI.
Thank you. You were here last time. A while back. Back in, back in March. No, you're here now in March. Back in December. And our comments were, excuse me, add trim around the main entry on the south and east elevations. The entry gates need to be more traditional with more decoration. Show that the 2-foot reduction in width of the entries as shown on the western elevations would look like. And the radius of the arch and the openings need to be studied and be more compatible on the west and south elevations. The arch should be 2 feet thick. Study a chamfer on the pilasters. The pilasters need more substance and massing. Study the plantings being located within the pilasters as opposed to, I forget. Okay, so talk to us about how your project has changed, please.
Bless you.
before, all of our walls were 8 inches. Now we're proposing 18 inches, so considerably wider, thicker. I've redesigned the gates and the entries.
Use this, please.
Okay. Before I had a softer arch on the over the gates, and the gates were actually went up all the way up into the arch. Now, it's more of a traditional straight gate. This is a true arch, and then with the surround following that same radius. I did make these 3 feet. I felt that 2 feet was a little bit thin, but that's I'll take your comments if you feel that it's still a little too thick. I did look into putting planters over the columns and felt that at this point I wanted to see if you would approve it without any planters on top of the columns. We do have now the dimension, but most of the examples on State Street are just plastered over the top. We don't have, I didn't see any 18-inch columns though, so most of them are 6 or 8 inches. We did increase all of the wood corbels and posts to 8-inch verticals and main beams, so that they're now beefier, more traditional. And I'll take your comments.
Great, thank you. Any open public comment? Seeing none, I'll close public comment. Questions from the commission? Mr. Suding?
As I see it, the columns are 5 foot 4 inches tall.
Right.
But when I look at this reference scale, it seems something's wrong here. Okay, it's a teenager. This is drawn to scale, so I just in relationship
Look at
to
this person.
Okay. Oh, yeah, he's a little better.
Yeah, he's 5'8", 5'6".
Common height. Okay. Because it just looks very imposing, and that's not what I want or what we should have.
That's a better reference.
Okay. Okay.
That person.
And then the last question is, where is this plant material coming from then, if it's not on top of the pilasters?
It's a potted. They're pots, and they're located behind the columns.
Okay. And do you have any plant material selected to
We don't.
Okay.
But Mr. Gupta had some ideas of what he wanted to see there.
Something covered with wooden, like Mediterranean, Indian sort of look. By the way, this is Indian green and this is Mexican green.
Okay, so we have to give you an approval? Is that what you're saying? Is that what you're saying? All right. Okay, so the plant material is evolving. Okay. All right, that's all my questions.
Other questions? Do I have any other questions? Comments?
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Suding?
I think the changes that you have made are good responses to our comments. This is much more appropriate than that sort of flattened or not true arch. Plant material, I would encourage you to use more of it, not just necessarily behind the columns. It would be nice to see, or to have pots maybe behind the columns, but then maybe some smaller pots along between those two larger ones to green that up as much as possible. I understand that you can't plant in Mother Earth because that's all paved there. So a nice arrangement of pots is going to help this with plants, of course, not just the pots.
And plant can be any sort of plant.
Well,
particular.
You know, I mean, I sort of like the way you're going a little columnar here, and that could work. But maybe to change it up a bit, the pots that are in between have something more draping, or you know, upright and draping. Leave it up to you.
Some magical plant.
Yeah, magic plant.
Magic plants.
I know what kind of those are. You know, you can't. I'm not going to say anymore.
And comments?
Yeah, I like this project very much. I think it's going to be a nice element on State Street. It retains a lot of openness that is important, I think, to El Pueblo Viejo, but it has a mission quality to it, and I think that it will be very successful when it's completed.
Thank you.
I do want you to worry about the tops of the. I appreciate the thickness of the walls. I think that gives it a lot of character and a lot of I think good feeling. As it you know, it should feel like these are adobe. This is stuccoed adobe, but I think the tops of those walls will these columns, the tops will collect dirt, and then, you know, that will run down and you'll have a problem. So it might be that they need to have a little pyramid, a very shallow pyramid on 1 to 12 or something, so that they can be easily cleaned off and not collect dirt.
Thank you. Other comments?
Why is this just here for
Sylvania?
comments only? Why can't we move this along?
This received project design approval already, but they need to come back with final details. So however you want to make a motion, if you want to push it to consent, if everything is positive.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Vania?
I'm concerned about the columns in as much as they're beefier and so forth, but I just find them rather flat, and I think I for one would like to feel a bit more warmth to them instead of just. Actually, they seem a little bit out of proportion to me as far as that goes. As far as the wrought iron is concerned, as far as the rating is concerned, it seems to be pretty monotonous. I'd like to see something that gives it a little bit more character to it, a I'm also concerned that this is going to be quite wide. Supposed to work anyway. Anyway, these are my concerns, and also I'd like to see a little bit of color to this, so that it isn't just bone white coming through there.
What, white where? I'm sorry.
In other words,
On the
face of
plaster?
The face of the art, the columns and so forth, I'd like them to be something other than just white, to give them a little bit of color to them, warm them up a little bit. A little patina or something.
Some Meridian Studio type.
Well, that's an interesting comment, because I'm somewhat bothered by the proportion of the arch to the field. It feels like the arch should be taller or broader, and the gate feels very plain to me in the top. It needs to do something. So going with what you're saying, and I don't think the applicant is afraid of color.
No, I'm a color person. We celebrated just last week colors.
Yeah, I know. And you washed it all off for us. That if there was a paint surround, and maybe the return was painted a color and a deep terracotta, would add an awful lot of life to this. And perhaps that color becomes the color
Paint those?
of the base of this, like a watermark. And if this had a more pyramidal top, I think it would
I think
take. It's not really
One more
bad enough
thing.
for a chamfer. And
chamfer
then
those
your signage
And
over there,
Thank you.
painted on the surface.
Thank you, sir.
I'm not sure
it might even be
that this is the place for these. As you walk around this
Parking
thing, that if the landscaping wasn't so regular, was more organic, with a clump of things here and a clump of things here, it might be more responsive to the site and just be more natural than a French garden approach. I think that would take off of the,
One more.
take the plainness off of the iron.
Yes, one more thing.
Yeah.
Perhaps we could have a design gate entry with a little more beef or a little more character to the entry gates.
Yeah.
And
Well, we just saw an application that is importing a Japanese wood gate to within the vernacular, and there are examples of Indians.
Yeah, we have we
would
do have one
yeah,
from the Mughal period.
Yeah,
which is
that
an
would-
antique palace door, which can be built in. Yeah.
you must have a couple of them laying around.
Yeah, well,
probably not couple, but
they're for
I
sale.
do have. I do have.
I mean, and that would be quite unusual and really quite lovely, rather than this boring sort of thing.
So explore alternative.
Mr. Chair?
Instead
Yes,
of the
Mr. Mahan.
instead of the Alcoa aluminum look.
Commissioner Drury and I have been drawing down here on a smaller.
Shame
environment,
on you.
And we find that if these columns, I mean, I like the massiveness of the columns, but I think if they are chamfered, they would look better. And it would, and you get the play of light then as it goes around the corner, and it makes it more interesting.
I'd stated that originally.
Mr. Drury.
Mr. Mahan and I were down here drawing, and I thought that if we narrow the width of the spaces on either side of the arch, but that was poo-pooed. But you're suggesting then that a real gate be put in instead of just a continuation of the.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a real wood
Yeah.
gate.
And a ta- and a-
So
and a-
something with a lot of character, an Indian gate, an antique
and
Indian
the
gate.
same dimensions?
No, the dimensions will be changed because those are the big
Right, okay.
old architectural structure.
And
design.
it's not unusual in Spain to mount square gates on the inside of an arch.
Right.
So you could take a square top gate, as long as the top matched the top of the arch?
Yes.
And then you mount it on the inside? It's done in
Right,
Islamic
right.
architecture a
Yeah,
lot,
yeah,
actually.
yeah,
And then, so they don't, it would be totally filling up that space.
makes sense.
And then they'd be
And
open
looks
against the walls.
Big ring handles.
Yeah, 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 I mean, yeah, they're usually gorgeous.
Yeah, we have it, yeah.
So,
We have it. I have it.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Grunberg.
Commissioner Vania and I were down here drawing.
I hope you're not charging this poor applicant.
Absolutely.
Yes.
No, I just had a couple of questions, which might fold into this as well. One of the things I noticed was there's a 10-foot rolling wrought iron gate on the east side. And I just wanted to first ask why the need for it?
What page are you
on? Site plan 1, it shows, it calls it out as a 10-foot rolling wrought iron gate.
This is the parking lot, and this is the way that
Shows, yes. This is behind of the State Street, and this is the
loading-
back side,
it's a loading
lot
gate.
side, parking
So
lot.
it's for getting trucks through?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it delivers.
Okay, and then did you look at doing it with hinges and mounting it on the back side, or mounting it to the sides instead of?
we can definitely do that. We thought that a rolling gate would just be easier there
Yeah, 'cause then you don't
with
have
the
clearance
remote.
behind. Okay. And then just so in terms of comments, I would say going in that direction, with the hinge gate. One of the things would be, especially because we're talking about planes, that way it would allow you to have the wrought iron on the same plane when it's closed. It would all line up with the other wrought iron. It wouldn't be set back. It would make sense if you have the big gate, big wooden gate, be mounted on the backside in a different manner. But for that way it'll look like it's all one continuous wrought iron plane. And then in thinking about the chamfer comment and the 18-inch thick, it's interesting to think. I mean, the 18-inch thick really is an adobe thickness, as opposed to brick or cover in plaster. And if it goes towards adobe, what about a detail similar to just went blank. Not Casa de la Guerra on where the tops of the piers, they're all adobe piers, square piers going up, and then the top is just basically a very simple square. The profile is a simple square profile. It just made me think that if you're going towards if you're going 18-inch thick on this wall, it really does feel like adobe. Then maybe the details should respond to that and be of this adobe level simplicity. I don't know if the chamfer would still work with it or not, or how. There's splays in Adobe, so it should be able to be done.
Do something
but
like that.
it just seems like that would be going towards one direction or the other would make sense with your details once you start coming back with the details.
Mr. Chair, one more thing.
Mr. Vania.
Assuming this side gate here is also going to be considered relative, as is the front gate, the entry here that's shown on the passageway through from the parking lot to the front to State Street, or from State Street to the parking lot. That's he exhibited another gate there. The other thing that bothers me back here on the rear, even though it's service and so forth, is that we're not giving it any consideration from the parking lot as far as some kind of making it more attractive than just the back end of this facility. And I think in many cases we should be considering the backs, the rear of some of these developments as opposed to just the front and the side. Not to make it more complex, but I think we just have one opportunity to make this attractive, and I think we should give it some consideration too. Unfortunately, or fortunately, this has three sides to the public as opposed to just one side. Thank you.
That's another factor of cost. Then the costs are going to go up. The budget should be in the.
Thank you. How many people agree?
Pardon me?
How many people agree with Julio? Raise your hands, please. That the east elevation needs more elaboration, or it's fine the way it is. That it
I can
needs
go
more?
kind of either way.
No, Mr. Chair, I think that's, it can be confusing to people coming from the parking lot. If that gate is too elaborate, it draws people to it, and that you don't want them to do that.
No, I was
There's got to be
talking-
a
I
back
wasn't
door and a
talk-
front door.
I wasn't talking about the gate, just making the back somewhat attractive as opposed to just basic.
Well, does it have planters? Should it have planters and stuff back there?
Well, it could have something. It could, I mean, obviously they're looking at people walking in from State Street, foot traffic, and through the passageway. And I think we could have something back there that would make it a little bit more attractive and put it into human scale as opposed to just basic.
Some nice wrought iron lights or
Did I
something.
miss you, Judy? Did you want to say something? Did I miss you? I'm sorry. Did
Or were
wanna
you
say
just
something?
voting?
I wasn't voting, I was just changing my hand.
I see. I think it's fine the way it is.
Please, television.
But I might be in the majority. Won't be the first time. Okay. We have a project here that has been
Lifelong, yeah, it's my lifelong project.
Yeah. And while we enjoy seeing you,
Thank you, sir. It's my honor also.
Going to be there a long time.
we'd like to see this wrapped up. I think this project has come a long way. It light years from where we started. We have chewed up a few architects and designers in the process. I think we have a mostly approvable project. So I would suggest that we forward this on to the consent calendar. We've made some suggestions about something on the east elevation to make it as nice as the other two elevations, and it may be as simple as landscaping. There were comments about adding color, adding more detail in the least a pyramidal top to the piers.
Chamfers, maybe.
Chamfers, perhaps.
More landscape.
More landscape, more decorative, suggesting an antique Indian gate for reproduction. The applicant has thickened up the pergola squares supports as we had asked.
Could I just quickly add one thing?
Yeah,
On
go
the west,
ahead.
on the west elevation, I don't know if it was just left out, but the wrought iron is different from the east and south elevation. The pattern is different, and if I want
All meant to be the same?
it's the south and east that is the right pattern, correct?
Supposed to be, yes.
Yes. Okay.
So a note that the more decorative south and east elevation wrought iron is to be used. Can I have a motion to the consent calendar, please?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Chair, we would need this continued if you do want it to go to consent to an official date, so not indefinite.
Not indefinite, to the next available consent calendar, which will be in 3 weeks?
It would be for April 5th.
So April 5th, I'm in India. Yeah, we want something here.
We don't need
You
would be out buying that
Wait,
cake.
there's
Yeah.
April
Looking for the
19th
gate.
as well.
Looking for the gate.
But
I mean, do you want to be here for that, or
The
would you like
19th?
your architect
Okay.
to handle it?
I
Which
would
date?
like to be there also
Okay, so
because
the
I like to
19th?
see
The
the whole
19th?
chair. Sure. Yeah, 19th is fine.
Okay, good. Yes.
Can I clarify a couple things? Was Mr. Brumby the second? Is that what I heard?
What's that? Yeah, I was second.
You were second. And then for the motion, you said something on the east elevation to make it as nice as the other. And then all of those things are what he could do to do that?
No, that's the other two elevations. Period. Next sentence.
Can we make that a little more precise?
Okay, yes, so more elaboration of the east elevation, period.
Elevation, that's it. Okay.
Okay, period. And then everything else for,
Okay.
got it? Good.
Your assets
All those in
should be
favor?
as
Wait,
good as your
Mr.
front
Chair?
sets.
Oh, under
Mr.
discussion.
Drury.
Yeah, I think we said something about something on top of the columns, something that would,
I did.
you did already? You covered that? Gosh,
They have to be
I did.
they can't be flat.
sloped,
They shouldn't be.
slope to drain.
Good, thank you.
Okay.
Does this need a design approval? Have we ever given this a
We
design?
already have.
This has already
is
received
review
project
after
design
final.
approval.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this goes to
Review after
consent.
final.
Okay.
Review after
Okay.
review after review after.
Okay.
I'm gonna open champagne tonight.
No, 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 Guinness.
Not yet?
Guinness.
Guinness. Oh, yes.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
You've got a sense of
Any
humor.
abstain?
That's good.
The motion carries.
It's going to exceed my budget.
Congratulations.
Yeah, nice project.
Thank you.
Nice project.
Thank you.
Find some good gates.
Yeah, we
Well,
have,
wait,
yeah.
do we lose
sell
corn? No,
them,
go
so
ahead.
I have in my
I mean, when you go home, bring some
But
back.
it costs like $5,000 one year.
That's in rupees.
The iron will cost you that much,
Thank you,
actually.
sir. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's almost 4 o'clock.
So,
Thank you for working with us,
a
by the way.
pint of Guinness and 2 fingers of Johnny Power Gold Label.
Mr. Chair?
They get 3 fingers.
3 fingers.
You didn't mind, you didn't mind waiting, did you?
Chunk of gold label.
This
That
is
first one.
11
Yeah, I'll
West
get it.
Pedregosa concept review continued.
Mr. Chair, Suding steps down and is leaving.
It's always that way, though. I mean, you can't tell when you
This
look
is
in there.
delicious.
You can't tell, you know,
Yes, you
how
can.
complicated. Oh, my God, it's huge. What do you got on there? What is that? What is it? What are those things? What are those things?
Oh, they're beads and shamrocks.
Oh, really?
I was gonna show you my photo from earlier, and then I had to come here.
Gentlemen and ladies, would you introduce yourselves for the record and let me read the comments from the previous minute and then show us your project.
Trish Allen with Suzanne Elledge Planning and Permitting.
Brian Broderson, landscape architect.
Tom Oxner, project architect.
Emmett Hawks, one of the owners.
Great. When you speak into the mic, you need to speak up, and you need to get within about 6 inches of it, or we aren't going to hear you, or they're not going to hear you. We can. So we have seen this project before. I thought we liked it. And
We did like it.
And we loved it. And we did make comments, though. And these weren't, these were everybody's comments. So that there was a nice interplay of buildings and suggested that the parking have a structural element instead of leaving it wide open. Commissioner Arias, that the proposal was designed sensitively to the neighborhood and appreciated the open space was taken into account. She favored softening the impact of the parking lot to look more residential. I said this is a good example of the AUD program, that the architecture is commendable, wide open feel of parking lot should not be mitigated, perhaps with more landscaping. Commissioner Grumbine didn't say anything worthwhile. He liked it. Commissioner Mary agreed, she liked it. Commissioner Mahan agreed, he liked it. Commissioner Drury.
What?
Do you remember what your comments were?
No.
He said
I
the
liked it.
elevation looks a little busy.
Yes?
He thought that units 5 and 6 looked more poetic. His Commissioner Suding suggested flipping the covered parking towards Pedregosa Street. So, gentlemen and ladies, how have you, how have you changed your project?
Okay, Tom Oxner here. And by the way, we're 3 out of 4 with green, so that's not too bad.
Okay.
I'm going to jump into the site plan.
Give me a second. Well, why don't you go ahead and I'll try to read all this stuff.
That's just for you if you do decide to give project design approval. You would have to make those conditions.
I have to just agree to all this stuff. Whether I want to or
Well, you
not.
don't have to read all of them.
Oh,
No,
good.
you
Okay,
just have
good.
to-
Okay, I understand. Thank you. We'd like to get out of here in an hour. Please.
Okay, so this is the landscape plan. I'll let Brian elaborate on this later. I'm going to use this to go over what's changed since the last meeting. What we've done here is,
Sorry.
there was a comment, the strongest comment I thought was to to relocate the covered parking over against Pedregosa Street. And we did that, and we incorporated a trellis along with that, and I've got drawings of that I'll show you in just a minute. The other change that we did was we were told by transportation that this first parking stall here was inaccessible. So what we did was we pulled the bike secured storage from against this building over to this corner and then put that parking space over there. So those got flipped. Those represent the architectural changes that we are proposing. I'll move into what that looks like here. So this is the Pedregosa elevation. So what we did is we took the two covered spaces and we pushed them up against Pedregosa and created a trellis-type structure with a almost flat roof with a cap sheet, a red cap sheet on it, which mimics a step-down portion of a trellis with wood trellis members. And then at this point, it steps back for visibility to the secured bicycle storage on that corner. This is the entryway into the project from Pedregosa Street. I'm going to go to the elevations, and we'll look at the other portions of that bike shelter and the rest of the elevations of the project here. So I'm going to skip. This is actually this illustrates what we've done along that side. So this would be the roof plan of the project. So we can see the way that the bike storage here sits, and then we have the open trellis area, and then this is that covered parking space that was relocated from here up against Pedregosa Street.
That's Pedregosa.
This is Pedregosa,
Right.
yeah. And in terms of the architecture, we went and put it on the computer and worked out all the proportions as carefully as we could. I colored up the State Street elevation to give an indication of how the landscaping will interact with the buildings. We've got the main access from State Street into the property right here, and then Brian will go over the landscape with you. And then the various elevations as they work around the building worked out very much the same as the preliminary drawings. Let's see. The windows throughout the residential units will be wood. The commercial building along the State Street elevation will have an iron. The arched window is iron, and the entry door is iron. All the other windows and doors will be wood. I don't have the architectural details ready yet, but I can, hopefully I'll be bringing them for final approval here soon. And let's see, I think there's a good, okay, yeah, this elevation here shows a side profile of how the bike enclosure interacts with the side profile of the trellis on that, on sheet A6.3. So it's still an open structure. I think that still complies as a secured bike storage. I haven't had anyone tell me that it doesn't. So, and it's got a door on the inward side for access, and it mimics that a trellised structure as well. And so I think that's the architecture. Brian, you want to?
Show us where your backflow device is. Do you know yet?
I don't know yet.
Location of dry utilities. I guess that's an electrical vault.
Yes, all the offsites are done. So the utilities are set up. I can show you where they enter the property. They're on the survey.
Is there anything above ground?
No.
Okay.
Although, yeah, I don't think the transformer will. The previous project had a transformer. John Maloney's working on the electrical. I don't believe we have a transformer on this project, but that potentially could be something that needs to be located.
Okay. Okay. You done?
We've got our landscape
Okay.
plan right here. So you want to switch these? Yeah.
I'll just walk you through the highlights, as it were. So, So along State Street, there are a couple of existing palms, and then there are garden walls, if you will, at the sidewalk face and set back slightly from the sidewalk. There's an existing bus shelter, and so it's basically a Mediterranean mixed planting along that edge. As you turn the corner on West Pedregosa, we paid specific attention to creating some interest. The intent is to have 3 significant olives that are located, triangulated in that location, and then some larger canopy trees to further canopy the parking and also to balance and create sort of a little bit more of a shaded or treed parking field. There are, on the plan, there are the typical kind of interesting Mediterranean Santa Barbara low water use trees, including an African tulip tree and a Tacoma stand, just to add a little bit of punch and interest and that sort of thing. And then some very stable trees. I believe we have a Tristaniopsis, nice, just very good performing evergreen tree. One of the things that you may not have seen in the last go around, we did add a pedestrian gate, so there would be a wee bit of a formal hedge with a gate opening that opens into a paved patio that works off of the commercial building in the back as an open space for those folks. So we formalized that a little bit, and I think it's kind of nice. We have a bay laurel at the trash enclosure. I find those are nice to do. And oh, I'm sorry, the laundry facility. Sorry, yeah, it's the laundry facility. And anyway, we've added a fountain and a little fountain court in this location. The intent is from all the openings at the public edge that there would be something kind of interesting to see and experience. And I thought in particular, Pedregosa, I think this would be very lovely and very typical. And I'm available for questions if you have any questions.
Okay, thank you. You're not going to say anything?
Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Thank you.
Thanks for having a special meeting on a holiday.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later.
At least everybody's in a good mood, so that's nice.
That man behind you owes us big time. I have no public speaker slips, so I will open and close public comment to the commission for questions. Are there any questions? Mr. Drury.
So from the elevation that I've seen, the illustration, it looked different than it did when you first presented. It doesn't seem so cluttered. That's just, it seems more simple, and the architecture seems more apparent. And that okay, that's, I guess my question would be, did you change that?
On the State Street elevation?
Yes,
Very
particular.
minor things. I think as it relates to the covered area through here, I simplified the eave line as it comes through there. I think that was predominantly maybe what your eye's going to.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Other questions, Mr. Mahan?
I have no questions.
Ms. Rios? Vania?
No questions.
Brumbein?
Yes. Sorry.
Please not.
Okay, I better go over there.
We just need to
Just a few minor ones here. Okay. All right. So if we can go to, okay, A6.1.
6.1 is going to be back.
Oh, sorry. A6.1.
Keep going.
Oh, way back.
Keep going. There it is.
Okay, so, and some of it is just clarification. So are these columns square in plan?
Yes.
Okay. And do they taper inward as they go up, or is that just my
Very
eye?
subtly.
Very subtly.
Very
Okay.
subtly.
Okay. The thought on clearance or design of this shape, is there a certain clearance for it, or is it just part of the design for it?
It's just to get some open space. There are some light through
Okay.
landscape.
Okay. And then I'm just trying to understand the reading of this drawing. Is this roof?
That is roof.
Okay,
Yeah,
it's just not tile. It's just not
It's
tile.
not delineated.
Okay.
It's a working drawing.
Gotcha. Yep. And then this peak here, is it popping out for a volume in a room, or is there some other? Is it just coming through from the other side, or?
Yes, that gable is higher than this gable, so that's how I decided to terminate that by running it through past the other gable slightly.
Okay. And can you show that from the other way, where that's how that's ending?
Could show it on the roof plan. That
Yeah.
would be,
Okay. Perfect.
That would be easier. See, that is.
Is that it?
Yep, I think, yep. Phil went right to it. That's it.
Okay. And then, let's see. Sorry, I think that's almost all of them. For this piece, is there a reason you are using these windows as opposed to doing screen for the Mirador here? Like, is there a reason why you're not doing a lattice thing? Is it for something in particular with this room, for the light, like wanting more light, or is there any other?
Like heavy bay timbered window projections. I thought that was
Okay.
a good place to break that.
Gotcha.
Feature that window.
Okay, I think that's it. Thanks.
Do you want, while you're here, go to comments?
Sure. While I'm up.
While you're here.
So, okay. So comment-wise. Actually, one more question. What material is that?
That is a red gravel cap sheet on there.
Red gravel cap sheet.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's metal and.
It's not metal. It could be, but I was
So
looking
you
at
see a metal edge, and you won't see that except from the
it's
second floor
it's
windows.
Subtly sloped. It's a hipped slope, 1/4" but the top is it's a red gravel on top of a cap sheet. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So and you're doing that just to make it carport.
Just to make it feel like it's more in association with a trellis across that frontage.
Okay. So I guess comments. It would be wanting to see what that looked like, or how that might play out for the carport. For the Mirador element here, I think if you go towards either wood or don't make it quite as Mirador-ish, have wood elements but just have it as a popped out plaster thing, or if you're going to go with the full wood thing, then do the Mirador and have windows inside or whatever, but have it some sort of a screen lattice, and just find some good examples maybe to look at for that. But if you're going to do it as a total added Mirador piece, then that's what I'd say for that one. For the other roofs and stuff, now that I understand what you're doing, I think that they're good. And I think in general that's it. I think in general it looks very good and it's coming along quite nicely. Yeah, so there you go, done.
Commissioner Pena, comments?
Couple of comments. First of all, I'd like to see some more palm trees along Pedregosa Street to carry on the scale to complement the buildings that you're going to have, which are on the high side, with multi-floor there, and perhaps even along State Street in here. The other is the entry to me here, the small entry gate off of State Street. It almost seems like you might consider having the trellis look as you come in with the columns that you have already here for continuity to bring it to the front. It seems like the entry gate is
tall, like a taller gate.
No, it just seems a little insignificant, and maybe that's what you're looking for. I don't know. Otherwise, it almost looks like you need something more of a statement at the entry, and maybe that's the way you wanted it, the way it is here. I don't know, but
There is some concern about security there. That's the purpose for the gate to begin with. It's right behind the bus stop, and
Okay.
so I'm not sure. I understand it could be a nice accent to highlight that.
with columns
Yeah.
or something.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's what I have. Thank you.
You can make it spiky, and they won't come in.
Glass on the wall, broken glass on the wall.
Yes, there was Always brings in
inappropriate
the
colors.
lawsuits.
Commissioner Reyes.
Again, you've done a really nice job with this
Yes,
project.
compliments on the job.
It's frankly the best AUD we've seen. And I wish more people would design things like this. And you show sensitivity, and the project shows livability. And it is someplace that I turned it off. It's someplace that I would be very happy to live. Other than those few minor comments, I think it's an excellent one, and I think it should get project approval design.
Commissioner Mahan.
Yeah, I think this is a very nice project, and it's going to be one that we're going to hold up to other applicants, other AUD applicants, as an example of what we like and what's appropriate to Santa Barbara. Really nice. The Mirador, which is a windows for a tub, right? There's windows for a tub. I don't think you'd need windows, open operable windows beyond a tub. And I think that maybe those ought to be fixed, or they could be in swinging. But I think it'd be much nicer if you had spindles, and so that people across the street, if there happens to be a two-story building across the street, they're not looking into that bathroom. I think it would feel better to have that spindle thing there. It'd be a nice detail touch. But generally speaking, I'm very pleased with this project.
Commissioner Durr?
I agree with those comments, and I particularly think that Commissioner Vena's idea about the entrance gate behind the bus stop, that should be addressed, maybe more significant. Otherwise, it's a terrific project.
Too late.
Thank you. To summarize the comments, this is the best AUD project we have ever seen. It is. Congratulations. In the new design guidelines, which you designed this project without, demonstrates the livability as we understand it in Santa Barbara. You are to be commended, as is the owner, whose cost hasn't been increased because of providing that, but makes his units that much more valuable for sale and to the community. It only seems that there are minor details that need to be worked out. One is the design of the Mirador on State Street. Various methods of screening the window or dealing with it just need to be restudied. There was the request for more palm trees along Pedregosa Street to tie the project together. And more of a statement for the design of the gate on State Street, as perhaps drawing more attention to that gate.
Wasn't that on Pedregosa?
I thought the one on State Street.
Oh, that gate there. Oh, yeah, okay.
Well, yeah, that gate. More showing it as an entrance, an important entrance to the project. So I'd suggest putting an arch maybe over the top, and you'd still put a solid. I mean, it just takes a little bit more, sort of saying I'm where you should walk. If I can have, let's see, where are we? Project design approval motion. It would come back with detailing. And I think the resolution of those few issues is very easy. And if we can have a motion for project design approval and consideration or inclusion of the conditions of approval from the Planning Commission, we will need to look at in future meetings, the screening of the backflow device, location of any above-ground utilities, and notation about recycling any sandstone curbs.
I'll make a motion for a design approval with those comments, Mr. Chair.
And
I'll
when would you
second.
like to come back?
Second?
You already, second, got it? When would you like to come back?
Next available meeting?
Would be
That'll be April 5th. Yeah.
3 weeks at continuance or something.
Mr. Chair?
okay.
Do you
Yes?
want me to come back to the full commission, or can we come back to a consent calendar?
I think it should come back to the full commission.
Okay.
I
For the,
always ask.
there's considerable amount of detailing that we need to see for the first time.
You had to ask.
So,
That's my job.
thank you. No, I appreciate it. So schedule for the next meeting. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? The motion carries.
And it-
Congratulations.
and
Compliments to the Hawk family.
Appealable to the city council.
And this is appealable to the city council within 10 days.
It's a great project.
Whatsoever.
Yes, it does.
That's beside the point.
It does.
The next generation can make some money out of it. We're not.
But you get all the compliments.
Yeah, I may be living there one day.
Our next item is 418 and
Obviously,
416
it's his
State
mom's
Street.
idea, not his.
Yeah, I could move it.
Yeah.
Be happy.
Yeah.
That's where the old Shell station used to be, isn't it?
There's,
Yeah, I think
yeah,
that's right.
Ryan bought it today and Cameron, they said to bring them.
Funeral home.
I have that sheet.
God awful building on the other corner, nondescript.
Gentlemen, if you could introduce yourselves to the record, and I'll read the comments from the last meeting before you begin.
Hello, I'm Kim Hughes.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Here we go.
Go ahead.
Court Gross, draftsman.
Welcome.
Hi, Kevin Moore, architect for the owner.
Welcome.
Thank you for having us on this St. Patrick's Day.
You're welcome.
I know it's not ideal.
I'm supposed to read this, aren't I? Okay, our commission comments from actually the last meeting. The removal of the recently installed arches and columns is acceptable. Should the applicant so wish to. The expression of the proposed architectural elements, trellis, tilt-up doors, windows, tilt-up doors, semicolon, windows and storefront are not acceptable with the EPV guidelines. All need careful consideration and to be more traditional. Wherever possible, the rear yard, in the rear yard where there is landscaping, the landscape area is to be increased, include trees where possible. For the human scale of the building is not appropriate or compatible with EPV guidelines. One commissioner expressed concern about sidewalk restaurants and air pollution exposure. That motion was passed for continuance, and so how is your project different?
Okay. Well, we heard your comments. Why don't we flip to, start with the site plan on A210. I guess let's work backwards.
Okay.
So the request was
You'll
to
need to get within like 6 inches, so.
scooch in.
2.20.
What,
2.20.
2.10?
We don't have a 2. We do.
So the changes, we've made an effort to add more detail to the site plan, and particularly the hardscape and landscape areas. We've increased the amount of landscaping, including areas for trees and buffering, neighboring building and trash enclosure. We've gone back and restudied the detailing on the trellis elements and some of the awning elements. So I think that's probably a good thing to start with. If we probably, on sheet A302, there's 2 views up at the top.
Excuse me.
They're pretty illustrative of what we're after here. So
a view of the rear of the project. We have the rear of the existing building here, and we have our 3 new openings that we're punching into it. Now we're showing seating and some other entourage in an effort to give a sense of what could be. We don't have a tenant, signed up for this space yet. So the seating layout and all of that may change, but the main elements that we are going to be working on are this trellis piece, these openings, and these shade elements that we see here. So on the building, this would be a metal element, not too different from the element on State Street up at Rejuvenation Hardware. Similar in detail and similar in scale. And then this trellis element would be a wood piece with some nice detailing on the ends and a bit of a little bit denser coverage over the top. This piece on the building would be solid to provide some rain coverage for that opening. On the south-facing side, in the parking lot, we have our other opening, new opening in the building, and we're using that same language here, over here, but we're having it as sort of a woven metal piece, which I think throws some nice shade on the building. I think looks pretty nice. And then the back, this building, which currently is sort of a little dilapidated, gets a pretty good refresh and bring it more into the Santa Barbara vernacular. And one of your comments had to do with the site wall. There was some interest in seeing it more as I guess more corner conditions and with some solid ends to it. So we added these pilasters, which relate to some existing pilasters on the site at the rear of this restaurant. So those will occur in those corner conditions and at the new openings. As we move up front, what we did is we decided to leave the existing condition as is at the facade on State Street. And we're focusing on the interior elevation of this space. There's currently a series of wood doors that there's a set of double doors here, man doors, and then within these panels, there's a series of folding doors that fold and stack to the side. What we'd like to do is similar to what we did up at Patchy's, is to create that bar experience where these are essentially single hung windows. They would be wood windows painted to match these existing doors, and they would come up and allow us to serve across that new bar. Again, there's no tenant yet, so we're trying to build in some flexibility there. And then you can see rear elevation here. You get a little view of what the trellis looks like, and then some more detail about those items. And there is the light. Just a nice wrought iron fixture that would provide general building lighting at our new openings, in particular around the rear of the project. Okay. Those are the extent of the changes.
Okay.
Happy to answer questions.
Okay. Open public comments, having no speaker slips and seeing no one left. Well, there is someone left.
Bravo.
Didn't mean that the way it came out. I'll close public comment to the commission for questions. Mr. Drury.
I just have a question. I can't see the detail of that lamp, but that will be in wrought iron, I'm assuming, black and white. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Mahan.
Yeah, I'm looking at A 3.02, perspective number 5, I guess it is. And I see gates there, that look like horizontal boards. Do we have a detail of that any place?
Not yet, but I think what we'll probably make them a vertical board to match the doors at the trash and be more consistent with.
You have the columns for the trellis that sitting in little stone pedestals. Yeah, I'm just curious why you did that.
Well, the structural attachment for this trellis member, they've gotten pretty large these days with code updates. So it helps us cover up some of that. But I wouldn't be opposed to trying to bring that wood all the way down and having maybe a smaller pad that disappears more.
Yeah, I just did well, that's a comment. Okay, thank you. Those are my questions, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Reyes, any questions?
No question.
Commissioner Reyes?
No.
Commissioner Bania, none. Mr. Grumbine?
Just, I think only one question. On A3.02, number 2, detail 2, the Suite B north elevation. Oh, sorry. Yeah, okay, so A3.02, Suite B north elevation, number 2. That's a section through that trellis, right? And what size are those? What size are those members that are being cut through? And then what's on top of that?
Are we talking about these?
Start at the top and
Yes.
work down.
Yeah.
Top. Well, these would be a 2x2.
Okay.
And then we come down to, I believe it's a 6x6. And then
Is it you have a detail on A9.02 of the trellis column, and on there you have 2x4, then 4x6. Is it
That's
something similar?
I think it's similar to that's specific to the large trellis.
Yes. Yeah, that's a large trellis. So is it?
So I think we scale it down a little bit, so it's a little bit more delicate as we drop down.
And what's in the very top? Is that 2x2s?
Yes.
Okay.
And what's the size of the next beam down?
This is a 6x6.
That's the 6x6. This is a 2x?
2x's are above that.
What's this then?
That's we're going to have a lid on this, so we're going to, essentially a roof.
Okay. And that's what it looks like. What is that material going to be? Do you have it yet, or are you thinking metal or what?
We'd like it to be metal, so it's a nice, consistent, low slope metal.
Okay. All right, that's it for my questions.
Okay. Comments? Commissioner Mahan?
I think this is improved from the last time we saw it, definitely. Certainly the State Street, leaving the arches the way they are and the columns the way they are on State Street, I think is a better choice. The facade inside of that looks like the doors that come down to human scale, as we have asked for, and that's very good. I believe the little stone pedestals that the columns sit on is too fussy, and the columns should just come down. And I know there are ways structural engineers can detail that without exposing the steel, and because they know how to do that. I think that when I look at I'm looking at A3.02, and when I look at the west elevation, it looks like the column for the trellis is maybe 8 inches or 10 inches, 8 inches. And then when I look at the north elevation, it's thin, so they're rectangular. It would be nice if they could be square. That would be more traditional that the columns would either be 8x8s or whatever they are, whatever, 8x8 I think would be a minimum. I think the gates should be vertical. All of the gates should be vertical. But generally speaking, I think this is certainly headed in the right direction.
Commissioner Arias, comments?
I think the comments have been made are to the point.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Vania?
Nothing to add.
Commissioner Grunbein?
Oh, I might have something. All in all, I think it's looking much better. I think it's on track. A couple of now getting to sort of minor comments, but so the light. I'm assuming the light because you have this nice light here. This is where you're going. This is just a placeholder. Yeah. Okay. Good. So the bike rack is looks like the bike rack and the horizontal gate are sort of leftovers from before, and so if that could be studied and brought in as well to a little more traditional. The little piers that you have, the little pilasters. I've seen the picture of the existing one. Looks good on A0.06. That and I'm assuming that they're going to be copying the profiles of those. So in the model, it looks a little sharp, but I think it's just the modeling of it, and not if you have your example to work from, then that's great. We've in the last year that I've been on HLC, metal awnings have gone. We've beaten them up pretty bad now, and so I think that even though there are some examples around town, we've been very negative towards the all metal awning. So that I think it's the use of metalwork like you have in the light here. Should be thought of as a wrought iron made by hand, so as much as we can avoid the tube steel and larger tube-like profiles, the better. And so, but as well, just the horizontal awning, there's been a number of projects recently that we've said no to that style of awning. So figuring out some other way, whether it's a wood and whether that's supported even with wood and iron. I think the detail that really works on this is your tie, your iron strap that goes and ties and has two twists and looks really nice and simple. That is a great place to start. So whether you turn it into a fabric, whether you turn it to wood support, or however you want to do it. But that would be one of the other things. But all in all, I think it's very much moving in the right direction. So yeah, that's all I got.
Thank you. I don't, well, what color would you like?
I can't remember your name.
Mr. Drury.
Nothing bad, thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to let you be chair one of these meetings.
Oh, I know.
It's good experience. It's come a long way since we last saw it, and I've heard good comments, and I agree with all of them. I think you didn't go far enough on the metal awnings, and you went too far on the pergola, on the trellis. You've got these really nice beefy columns. You've got a pretty decent piece of wood sitting on top of it that's going to, the ends are going to disintegrate in about a year. It needs to be beefier. I mean, it needs to be simpler, I think, in profile. You tried too hard to make it. Is that your fault? Tried to make it too traditional, and it's almost too Baroque. And then all of a sudden, it disappears. It becomes nothing. It comes to air. So the next piece up needs to be clunkier. And then the pieces on top need to be a little bit clunkier. 2x2s almost disappear, and they're going to twist and check and really disappear in a very short period of time. And they should all extend, as you go up in a pergola, typically things keep on reaching out for space as opposed to coming in. So all of those pieces, as they go up and get a little bit bigger, need to extend out a little bit further and grab more sky. I agree with the comments about the, probably a lot easier just to keep the arches and the column in front. You know, and I'm not sure about the storefront, but if it's fine with Mr. Mahan, it's fine with me. So to summarize the comments, that we do support the retention of the arches and column on the State Street facade, that we find the current design for the storefront at State Street acceptable. We find the increased landscaping in the rear commendable. Three items that I think that we think need further study are the trellis, the wood trellis, and then the eyebrow awnings, to perhaps be more traditional, using that word again. And that on any gate, the wood board should be vertical. The light fixture is acceptable. We haven't seen colors yet. When would you like to come back? Our next meeting would be in 3 weeks.
Our next meeting is next week, actually.
Yeah, well, no, but
That
that agenda's already been handed
3
to
weeks,
us, been
yeah.
published. So 3 weeks is our next, or that's right, yeah.
Correct, April 5th.
April 5th. Would you like to come back then?
Make a motion.
Yes, absolutely. I guess we were hoping that since everyone has a good feeling about the project, that we would be moving towards a PDA. That we can.
Mr. Drury?
Motion for project design approval with those comments.
Can I have a second?
I'll second it.
I heard Mahan first. Any discussion? Do you have the comments? All those, PDA, come back here to the full board?
Oh, yeah.
3 weeks.
In 3 weeks? All those in favor?
Aye.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Motion carries.
And it's appealable.
And this motion is appealable to City Council within 10 days.
Very good, very good.
Yes, I do.
Happy St. Patrick's Day to everybody.
Thank you for having a special meeting.